Of privilege and recognition of guests, the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning and welcome back to all of my colleagues for another day in the legislature. It's always an exciting day when the provincial budget is being presented, Mr. Speaker, and it's reinforces to all of us what a privilege it is to be in here when you actually get to sit in here and be part of that. So I look forward to that later today. Mr. Speaker, in my greetings today, I'd like to just recognize that first annual Sign of Spring taking place again this year with the Easter Beef Show. Back after a year hiatus with some new protocols in place, but it's been a tremendous island tradition for 70 years. And as I say, it's really that first sign that spring is around the corner. And I do plan to head over there later today to take part in kind of a modified official opening, Mr. Speaker, and look forward to doing that and seeing all of the farmers and all of those involved in the 4-H movement across PEI and many others, Mr. Speaker. So good to see that back. Today is also the last day of classes for our island students, teachers, and educational professionals and staff, Mr. Speaker, as they head into the March break weekend. I hope everyone enjoys the break, takes the chance to get outside and enjoy our wonderful province, spend some money. Our Activate Our Island plan is out there rolling out and encouraging people to move throughout the province safely. And just want to take a moment to thank all of those in our education system who have gotten us through some difficult times in this school year, Mr. Speaker. Also, very much appreciated seeing in the paper yesterday my friend and former boss and mentor Pat Pins and Scott Burho, Mr. Speaker, a friend of mine, playing pickleball down in Murray Harbour. I had a great chance to talk to Pat last week at the Sports PEI Awards. His son Rob was actually the Senior Male Athlete of the Year, Mr. Speaker, and Pat is doing well. Usually goes south, like many Islanders, Mr. Speaker, but not able to do so this year, so is keeping himself busy. He has some laying hens, Mr. Speaker. He gave me a dozen eggs on the street in Charlottetown, Mr. Speaker. If somebody was walking by and saw two people in the trunk of the car, they might have thought there was something more conspicuous going on, but it was a dozen brown eggs, and they were lovely, Mr. Speaker. So to Pat and Carol, I say hi, and I'm glad you're tuned in. And Scott, of course, I've known since I was a very wee lad, and he's a lobster fisher, and good to see him out. And all of the individuals in the Murray Harbour area, Mr. Speaker, staying active and promoting a healthy lifestyle. And Mr. Speaker, this is also the last day before the legislature goes into its first, I don't think it's a break week, we call it, what is it? Planning week. So we will miss next week being able to recognize on the official day of March 17th being St. Patrick's Day, Mr. Speaker. And I just wanted to say to those who trace their roots to the lovely country of Ireland, to happy St. Patrick's Day. And there will be a week of celebration at the Irish Culture Centre in Charlottetown, Mr. Speaker, which starts tonight with a concert by Fiddler's Sons, Mr. Speaker. My good and dear and longtime friend Eddie Quinn, of course, the lead singer of Fiddler's Sons. And I saw his photo in the paper yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and I always joke to Eddie that the only person in Prince Edward Island with this picture in the paper more than Lawrence Macaulay, Mr. Speaker, is Eddie Quinn. He does a wonderful job of promoting his immense talent and does bring a lot of joy and happiness to Islanders from tip to tip. So, Mr. Speaker, to Eddie, to Fiddler's Sons, to all those of Irish heritage, and all of those who wish on March 17th there were of Irish heritage, Mr. Speaker, I say happy St. Patrick's Day.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the Easter beef sale is a sign of spring, but in my district, it's not the first sign. The first sign of spring is a whole bunch of cars parked at the end of the driveways because it's too muddy to get down, and that's certainly the case. And in my, as I was driving to work this morning, I was very aware of that. Parked my own car on the road last night for the same reason. But yeah, it's great to see the the Easter beef sale going ahead, albeit scaled back as it needs to be for COVID. The sale is today, and of course many members of this House would typically be there for the Easter beef sales, but we can't be there today. I have a vivid memory of the now Minister of Agriculture and Land being one of the auctioneers there a couple of years ago, and before he took on his current role, and he was very colourful and florid in his duties there, and that's I think perhaps the first time we ever met, and I've never forgotten that. You did a fantastic job. The Premier mentioned getting some eggs from Pat Binns and that they were brown eggs. My wife looks after chickens, and she should pass them on to Pat, because her chickens actually lay blue eggs, which of course I'm sure you would rather receive. She does get green ones, and she gets brown, she gets white, she gets blue, and she gets green. But I'll make sure that no red. No red. But that's a lovely little island story. I can't imagine any other legislature in the world where you get the Premier would stand up and tell a story like that. I want to make note of a good friend of mine who just moved back to the island a couple of months ago and was recently given the job, or won the job rather, of executive director of the Indian River Festival, Lindsay Conley. A wonderful young island woman, went through McGill University and Toronto. I'm not sure which institution she was in Toronto, but she's a wonderful singer, a beautiful human being, and I have no doubt that she will do a fantastic job as the new ED at Indian River Festival. I mean, it's one of those iconic island locations where it's aesthetically and acoustically a spectacular place. And Lindsay is a singer, and I look forward to seeing her there, hearing her there, and as Fred Martin, who is the festival board chair, said, he says, "I speak for the entire board when I say that we are thrilled to have Lindsay return home and lead our festival. The excitement is building towards welcoming back concert lovers to beautiful St. Mary's Church." And indeed, I think the whole island should be thrilled that Lindsay Conley is back here and that she's taken on such an important role. So best of luck to her. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today and welcome everyone back. And I'd like to say hello to everyone watching from home, and a special hello to Lauren Yo, who I know used to be in here and he was mentioned earlier this week. Mr. Speaker, it was a wonderful drive down this morning, except to hear on the radio that fuel prices took a significant jump. And it was kind of ironic. I was speaking to the Minister of Fisheries there, and we were grabbing coffee on the way in, and he was kind of passive about that increase. But not that long ago, he was pretty upset when fuel used to go up, and pretty upset with Iraq. But good to see that now that he's over there, he's seeing things differently. Mr. Speaker, I'd also would like to say, it's a sure sign of spring when Scooter's Dairy Bar opens in Muscush. And it opened yesterday, and they were some busy. And they couldn't have had a better day to open. So I wish the management and staff all the success in this season. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize some deserving individuals who are up for the 2021 Francophone Ignition Gala Contest, which is put on by RADI and the Francophone Chamber of Commerce. These contestants could win a $25,000 prize. The finalists will present their concepts to a panel of judges, and one will be selected for the prize money: a free course from College de Lille and a one-year membership to the Island Chamber of Commerce, Francophone Chamber of Commerce. Paul D. Gallant is presenting his idea for a dinner theatre. Donnell Richard and Jake Corone are presenting their mobile sound recording studio. Samantha Arsenault and Natalie Gallant are presenting their Acadian clothing business. And Saint Lemaire will be presenting an expansion to her online store. The contest was originally scheduled for March 3rd, but due to the modified lockdown, it has been moved to March 16th, which I send my regrets. I won't be able to attend as I have another function, but I want to wish all these deserving individuals the best of luck. Bon chance. Also, Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize the 70th annual Easter Beef Show, which is being held at the Charlottetown Eastlink Centre. Yesterday was the show portion, and Daniel Daddy of Orwell Cove was named Grand Champion and also received the 4-H Showmanship Class Trophy. Congratulations on your success, Daniel. The sale will proceed this afternoon, albeit under different circumstances this year, of course. Buyers will now be located in the top of the park in Red Shores, where they'll reserve the auction and bid on the cattle. I hope the prices are good and everyone has a great afternoon at this auction. And I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just before closing, we're here to oppose, or we're here to keep government to task. I'd just like to add a little thing in my opening remarks. As indicated in the last few days in the letters to the editor, I guess the tone seems to be changing in this House. People are starting to pick that up. I don't know if that has anything to do with government having a majority or not, but people are starting to notice that the tone is changing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a pleasure to rise. As the honourable members mentioned, that spring is definitely in the air. As people are seeing a little bit more sunlight and as the temperatures do start to rise, if you are a resident of District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow, or if maybe you're one of the many people who travel through, the residents do ask you to slow down, especially this time of year, Mr. Speaker, when there may be some puddles on the side of the road. You know, no one really wants that water splashed on them, Mr. Speaker. One other thing, too, is with the students being home next week, Mr. Speaker, last night I seen a lot of younger kids getting the bikes out for the first time in a long time, some of the rollerblades and the scooters. So again, just a reminder to slow down. Of course, too, with the extra hour going to be coming of sunshine with the Spring Forward on Sunday morning, Mr. Speaker, I know you as well as many firefighters across the province, reminding all islanders to check your smoke detectors and your carbon monoxide detectors, not only to replace the batteries, but also to check the age of expiration on those devices. And it is a pleasure, Mr. Speaker, that I wish my father, John, a happy birthday tomorrow. Dad would not want me to give his age, but for those in the house that do know my father, he is a sports trivia buff. So if you want to find out how old my dad turns tomorrow, he will be turning next year the age with the jersey number of his favorite all-time catcher, and his favorite all-time catcher is Hall of Famer Carlton Fisk. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Speaker, and it is a lovely day this morning. I noticed this morning I got up and went outside. I only had a T-shirt on, and it was nice to see the sun coming up, and you could feel that spring in the air. So that was a good thing. But Mr. Speaker, I want to give a shout out to an individual I've gotten quite close to know in the last year and a half, 2 years as a minister, is Bob McLeod with the PEI Shelf Association, and Bob and his group have been really working hard with our department, and we enjoy a lot of conversation. And this morning, it was refreshing to have a text from Bob, and he wanted to talk to me about a new idea involving our young people in the aquaculture industry, and that's something that I believe in, and we're going to pursue that. But I just want to give a shout out to Bob for all of the work he does with the Shelf Association across the province. But also I'd give a shout out to Jasmine. And I don't know if anybody in the House remembers Jasmine, but she was a page here in the House a few years ago. And her and Riley just had a newborn baby boy in the district. So a shout out to Jasmine and Riley and the parents of both, and all the best in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice and Public Safety, and the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to welcome everyone here today, and it is the Friday before our break, or not, planning week, sorry, and we look forward to that. I just want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that 32 years ago today, Karen Mcdonald started to work in the Department of Justice as a youth worker, Mr. Speaker, and today she's the acting Deputy Minister of Justice and Public Safety, Mr. So she must have started when she was a teenager, Mr. Speaker, because it's been a long time. But I also want to give a shout out to Daniel Natty, who had grand champion at the Easter Beef show yesterday, and great young man from Orwell. And when I went there yesterday to open the show, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that it's a younger group there, Mr. Speaker. It's kind of a changing of the guard. It's younger faces, and it was great to see Daniel win. And of course, the reserve went to Austin Potts, Mr. Speaker, and he's from the Bahnshaw area, Mr. Speaker. Another young fella, and his grandfather, Temple Stewart, one of the stalwarts from the beef breeding industry. Since the one more thing, Mr. Speaker, since the Premier started it, he brought up the chickens, Mr. Speaker. I do have a little story. Only on the PEI legislature would you get this, Mr. Speaker, but since COVID started, my kids have been chored the task of feeding the calves, Mr. Speaker, at the family farm. They've been doing a great job, so Mr. Speaker, my daughters wanted chickens. So we went and they ordered some chickens from the co-op. We picked up the cute little chicks this summer, Mr. Speaker. But one was different. When they started to grow, Mr. Speaker, one was different than the others, Mr. Speaker. One of our chickens was a rooster, Mr. Speaker. So as my daughters and my son are feeding the calves every day, and they said, "Dad, the rooster's getting a little mean. He's coming at us." And I said, "Oh, you're foolish. He's pretty good. He doesn't bother me." So I want you to picture this, Mr. Speaker. I was helping them feed their calves the other day. The Minister of Agriculture had 2 full buckets of milk, Mr. Speaker, and I walked into the calf nursery. And all of a sudden, I swear to goodness, it was a 4-foot rooster came at me, Mr. Speaker, all railed up. 2 buckets of milk went all over me, Mr. Speaker. So I want to announce today, my daughters have a rooster for sale, Mr. Speaker. So if anybody's interested in good chicken soup, we have a rooster.
The Honorable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly an honor to rise in the legislature on this beautiful Friday morning. I'd like to welcome everybody watching home from Kensington, Maltech, as well as all Islanders tuning in this morning. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to wish a good friend of mine an upcoming birthday on Tuesday. Kent Mcdonald is the CEO of Tourism PEI, and he's going to celebrate a birthday on Tuesday. And Mr. Speaker, over the last year, I couldn't think of a better person to be working through tourism with what's going on with that COVID right now across the world. So Kent and his team have done a phenomenal job behind the scenes, rolling out programs and dealing with industry. So I certainly wish Kent a happy birthday on Tuesday and hope he's able to take some time off to join it with his family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Mr. Speaker, and just great greetings
Charlottetown,
to
Victoria Park. I can't tell the difference, but
Everybody wants to be me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to all my colleagues and all Islanders tuning in today on this beautiful sunny Friday morning. On my walk to work this morning, Mr. Speaker, I met the crossing guard as I usually do, and as every morning I comment on the great service. And this morning she said, "But I won't be here next week because it's March break," and she was so excited. And so I just want to take this opportunity to wish all of our school personnel and all of our students a wonderful March break. I know there's been some snow days and a few days off with shutdown, but I'm thrilled that stopping March break was never on the table, because never ever have school personnel and students been so strong in setting their fears and anxieties aside and continuing with business as usual. So I really wish you all a wonderful, wonderful break, and I'm sure that our kids will be getting way too much screen time and playing and having a wonderful time. I know we are keeping our March break pretty free of plans to let the kids just kind of run around like free-range chickens. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure to rise. It is a beautiful day out there, and it's an exciting day. It's budget day. Who doesn't love a budget day? And I'd like to say hi to everybody from Mermaid Stratford and across the island. I would just also like to express my congratulations to everybody participating in the Easter Beef Show. That is certainly an exciting time for agriculture. And Daniel Natty, who was the grand champion, he is part of the Millview Vernon River 4-H Club, which covers my district. And my daughter was actually in last year. We took the year off knowing our family circumstances and needing to spend a little more time at home. So we took this year off, but I've been informed that the pony project, the horse project, that is what's in my sights for next year. So that will be interesting. I'd also just like to comment on the leader of the official opposition's comment on cars at the end of their driveway. I live on a dirt driveway, 1/4 of a kilometer long. And so you can imagine I'm about probably 2-3 inches of mud right now. So to recognize where I've parked, and everybody's always been able to recognize where I've parked in any parking lot, it would be where the mud piles are. So I try to park in the same spot all the time just for that reason. I just wanted to bring up my Girl Guides briefly and say thank you to the member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park, who attended Girl Guides with me last night. And we talked about, you know, the power that you can have if your voice is being heard. And we asked the girls what kind of legislation they would bring forward to this provincial legislature if they had the opportunity. And a lot of them had some really interesting thoughts, and I just wanted to share them. So, not allowing somebody to be overworked who just came back from ease back. That's coming from a kid who's, these girls are grade 4 to 6. So yeah, I can understand kind of what's happening to them at home and what they're hearing at home. Plastic in the ocean instead of in the garbage. We don't need to use as much plastic as we're using. No racism. Do not discriminate based on sexual orientation. Don't kill someone when they haven't done something wrong. 100% agree with her there. Stop the misuse and abuse of children that are involved in participating in child labor. These are kids from grade 4 to 6 and what they're hearing, what they're listening to, what's going on in the world. But on a lighter note, I would share the one that I think was the funniest and the girls had the most fun with was the fact that they buy a bag of chips and there's only half full bag of chips, and they feel like they're buying half a package of air. And that related to the whole environmental side of things and why are we selling so much packaging and I'm only getting half of the stuff that's in it. So then we went into an improv session where they all had to act out scenes, and it was a riot. So it was a great time, and I want to thank the member for joining me, and really she says we could learn so much from our kids, and we absolutely can. And I would just like to, one other thing, recognize a year ago today, this Parliament, this Legislative Assembly was preparing for Girls' Parliament, and that was where girls in Girl Guides, Pathfinders, and Rangers were all going to take our seats for 2 days and do something similar to what the Youth Parliament through the Rotary does. And we had kids coming from New Brunswick and all across PEI that were going to come sit in our seats and solve the issues on this province. That unfortunately did not take place because of COVID-19. So that was one of the big losses, and I look forward to hopefully having support to doing that again, because I really do believe that as many youth voices that we can participate in the democratic process is so important, and they have such great ideas. So I just wanted to recognize all the people that had prepared for that and worked so hard for that, and I really do hope it's something that we can do again. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Honorable member from Charlottetown, West Ryde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to rise, say hello to everybody in District 14 and hope they have a healthy, active day today. And, you know, this morning, Mr. Speaker, I got up and decided to leave the car at home and go catch the T3 Transit. And on the way, I wasn't 2 or 3 doors down, and I just wanted to tell a little story. It's a simple story. Somebody was coming out of their house, and they were obviously rushing to get to work, and she's a new constituent of mine, and she just stopped on the dime, and she just said, "Can I give you a drive?" And it was just the way she did it, Mr. Speaker. It was the compassion. It was after everything that we've been going through, she just was there for another person that she didn't know. And I said, no, I was walking to the bus stop and went on my way and had a great bus trip down, and that allows me the freedom now. I've got my fitness stuff in the car, and I'm going to run. Well, I don't run anymore. It's more like a slow walk, jog home. And the member from Charlottetown Winslow talked about puddles, and I'm kind of worried on the way home as I'm running that you folks on the other side might find one of those puddles when I'm running. So I'll be watching out for that. So. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Have a great day, PEI.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's very good odds I'll be the father of a brand new baby girl when we return from after break here. Thank you. And I just wanted to rise and let her future self know that she represents my hopes for the future. And that I think of her constantly. And I cannot wait to welcome her into a world that has risen to the challenges before us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. A pleasure to rise today. And, of course, welcome everyone watching from District 18 Russell Emerald. And, Mr. Speaker, I do want to recognize all of the education staff out there and wish them a great March break. I know that my son in particular is looking forward to it because he's going to be able to spend some more time with his flock of chickens. He's got one rooster and he's got 6 hens, 3 of which came from the Minister of Agriculture. And I should mention that, you know, my son, we have a rooster as well, and we have some similar problems with, but my son and his buddy from down the road looked up YouTube videos, and they decided that, you know, it was time to make sure that they put the rooster to use in a different way, Mr. Speaker. And so they have a lot of experience now, and they did this all on their own on how you could prepare a rooster for your Easter meal, Mr. Speaker. So if you do need some help with that, my son would be happy to help you prepare your rooster for an Easter meal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to all my colleagues for joining today. Mr. Speaker, I think you'll agree it feels a bit lighter in here, quite jovial. So it's really, I think everybody, the sun is sprucing us all up. It's a good day, it's a good Friday, so I'm happy to be here. I wanted to say hello and thank you to all the folks in District 9, and I wanted to give a special shout out to Ali McCabe. I received a note from Councillor Julie McCabe last week, and she had suggested that her daughter's been watching. Her daughter's at UPI, and anyway, on her I guess her quiet time, she's watching the legislature, which is just wonderful to see. So hello, Ali. Mr. Speaker, also as many parents in this room might know, the Island Hockey, some of Island Hockey is winding down this weekend. Mr. Speaker, I cannot say enough thanks to all of the coaches, the volunteers, the organizers, the associations, and Hockey PEI and the CPHO for the incredible coordination this year. It's been a tremendously challenging year, but the fact that my 5-year-old has been able to get out on the ice most every weekend this winter is phenomenal. It's livened up our lives, it's livened up his life, and I know it's livened up the lives of so many kids across Prince Edward Island. So I just wanted to say a special thanks to all those involved, and particularly to the parents for your patience. My husband is a coach with the team, and he's just always in awe at the patience that parents have shown for the coaches and the organization throughout the last season. And finally, Mr. Speaker, which has already been said in here, but I want to reiterate to all of the educational staff and to our students, have a wonderful March break. You earned it, you deserve it. Just relax, enjoy, get outside, and take a deep breath. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbanks and the third-party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To start off today with congratulating UPEI, the new student union at the university, and there's a couple of people that I want to signal is Sam McLean, who's president, and Brianne O'Connor, who's actually president of the Young Liberals. So our future's in good hands in regards to the UPEI Student Union. And of course, Easter beef, everybody mentioned the different farmers and the different recognition. And a lot of when you look at a lot of these names over the course, Ryan Boswell and James Worth and the Potts family and the Ford family, I think of 4-H and how important 4-H is to Prince Edward Island and keeping the tradition alive in the Easter beef. And of course, also entering Hockey PEI and President Mike Hamill and the job they've done over the course of this winter. I haven't been to a rink. This is likely the first time since I've likely been 3 years old, but I certainly appreciate seeing the results in the paper and the contribution that Hockey PEI has made to ensure that takes place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Did I miss anyone? Well, honourable members, I find it very ironic that the Minister of Agriculture and Land is selling turkeys on budget day. What's that saying about our budget? Honourable members, yesterday, the leader of the third party rose on a point of order stating members should be better prepared proposing amendments, or two motions. Members, I do not find this to be a true point of order. In our rules, members are allowed to move amendments to the question under debate without notice, and the House does require that the amendment is in writing to ensure that the motion is in order and that it is proposed to the House exactly as worded by the mover. While I will note that all members should try their best to be prepared with amendments prior to the question being called before the House, I also recognize that there may be times that a member is struck during debate with an idea for an amendment. In those instances, the House practice has been to take a brief recess to get the amendment or sub-amendment in writing and to make copies. To end, I will encourage all members to come prepared to the House with potential amendments, and will advise the members may seek advice from the table officers regarding the proper wording of a motion to amend. And honourable members, the member from Cornwall Meadowbanks and the third-party House Leader rose on a point of order yesterday, which is not a point of order, it's more of a clarification. So members, when you're rising on a point of order, make sure you're on a point of order and not clarifications. Thank you. Statements by members. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise today to highlight a program that benefits a wide range of islanders every year. It's the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program. Each year, the volunteers of the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program assist island seniors, newcomers, students, single-parent families, and others with the preparation of their annual tax filings. The program is delivered by dedicated community volunteers who tirelessly give of their time to help their fellow citizens, Mr. Speaker. Volunteers will be accepting information slips and documentation in order to complete and transmit an individual's income tax return with the Canada Revenue Agency. It's important that islanders do file their taxes because it makes a person eligible for things like receiving your HST or GST rebates, your monthly Canada Child benefits, your monthly guaranteed income supplement, to name a few supports. Across the street at the Murphy's Community Centre, there is a drop-off of tax slips and information which can be dropped off on Mondays, Mr. Speaker, from 9 a.m. till 10:30, and also from 1:30 till 2:30 p.m. On Tuesdays from 9 a.m. till 10:30, and that goes until April 27th. A word of thanks also, Mr. Speaker, going out to the PEI Union of Public Sector Employees who provided the resources to have the summaries and also the information supplied returned by mail. That is a real indication of partnerships being established and people working together for the betterment of our community and those in need. Mr. Speaker, I encourage islanders who could benefit from the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program to take advantage of the service provided by the such dedicated volunteers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, and the Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise today and recognize the upcoming Down Syndrome Awareness Day, which will be the first one officially observed here on Prince Edward Island. In 2011, the UN General Assembly declared March 21st as World Down Syndrome Day and encouraged governments, private sector, and civil society to observe that day. This date, March the 21st, was chosen to signify the triplication of the 21st chromosome, which is what causes Down syndrome. Last fall, I was pleased that this House adopted legislation cementing Down Syndrome Awareness Day into law. During debate on the floor, I was happy to be joined by Janet Charchuk. Janet has been a long advocate for Down syndrome awareness, and she seeks to help and support others whenever she can. She has been involved with 4-H over the years, where she won multiple communication competitions and also served as a motivational speaker at numerous and different events. Janet's advocacy also reached beyond just the island. She is a representative for Down Syndrome International and has been a keynote speaker at international conferences. I was also pleased to have Janet join me in passing this bill because she's a great example of how much one can accomplish if you are hardworking and caring towards others. Mr. Speaker, Janet certainly is both of those things, and I thank her for joining me last fall. I want to take this opportunity today to speak about Down Syndrome Awareness Day because we won't be sitting on the date of March 21st. Across the country and the world, Down syndrome associations promote the day as an opportunity to educate people about Down syndrome and highlight the many accomplishments by association members. Often the day is celebrated by wearing your most bright and colorful socks and posting them to social media under the hashtag #LotsOfSocks. So I encourage all members of this House to break out their brightest socks in preparation for the 21st take the opportunity to amplify their stories and the accomplishments of Islanders in your own districts who are living with Down syndrome. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a saying that a woman's work is never done. And in most cases, and certainly in my experience, especially if there's young children or older parents to take care of, that's completely true. But additionally, women do not only get paid less compared to men and occupy fewer senior management positions, they also often get fewer credits for the work they do accomplish. One such woman is Lynn Douglas, who can be seen every Saturday at a knitting booth called In Sheep's Clothing at the farmers market in Charlottetown. Lynn has a rich past history and, like myself, can point to the PEI ARC project as a defining project in her life. In the early 70s, Lynn was working in Ottawa for the federal government, holding some of the purse strings for the millions of dollars that the federal government was spending in response to the oil embargo. So when Andy Wells, then Secretary to Alex Campbell, came looking for funds for PEI projects, Lynn was the one to speak to, and very much the one that made the whole thing possible. In those days, funds just flowed from the feds with no requirement for matching provincial funds. Therefore, the entire ARC project funds of about $350,000 was administered by Lynn, with PEI contributing just the land. Lynn was probably involved in other PEI projects that I don't know about, but I do know that the ARC project meant a big life change, as he married Andy a few years later and has resided on PEI since, raising a family. Andy Wells, of course, got his credits, including a book about the Institute of Man and Resources that he created. The book includes the ARC project that was managed by IMR for a few years, but as can be typical for women throughout history, Lynn's contribution to the ARC project was not even mentioned there. So here's your credit, Lynn. Thanks so much for all the work you did to bring the ARC to PEI. It has made a huge difference to PEI and myself. Thank you, Lynn, and thanks to all the women who continue to do good work and deserve more credit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's the end of member statements. Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as noticed. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I was asked a couple of important questions by the member from Cornwall Meadowbank, in particular about where frontline blood services workers and RCMP or municipal police officers were in the sequencing for vaccinations. Mr. Speaker, I've been able to confirm with the Chief Public Health Office that frontline blood services workers are considered frontline healthcare workers and are in phase 2 of the vaccine rollout and will begin getting their appointments in the next week and will be vaccinated before the end of the month in Q1. For RCMP and municipal police officers, they would fall under first responders, which are also a priority group in phase 2 and will be receiving their appointments this week, Mr. Speaker. And just, I wanted to again say that as we have tried to articulate in this assembly many times, the sequencing for populations in our COVID-19 vaccination program is based on the advice of NACI, the National Advisory Council on Immunization. Recommendations and a variety of factors, and these decisions, of course, are not easy to make, but the sequencing is made with the expert advice of the 13 Chief Public Health Officers from across the country who have led our nation through this pandemic, Mr. Speaker. So thank you very much.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park, asked for details on how per-student mental health funding for post-secondary students has directly supported students. Before I provide that information, I first want to correct the member's statement that the Government of Prince Edward Island is defunding mental health supports. The Government of Prince Edward Island provides all 3 of our province's post-secondary institutions with $25 per student enrolled. The base budget line appears in our grants to post-secondary institutions through a mental health supports grant. It is not funded through the Student Financial Assistance Corporation. I would refer the honourable member to the budget handouts that MLAs received from 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021. At UPEI, the grant has helped support the hiring of a third counsellor, which has allowed UPEI to do new initiatives such as reaching out to and connecting with athletic teams. The grant has also helped UPEI provide students isolating in hotels with mental health check-ins twice a week. At Holland College, the funding helped the school hire a third counsellor, which had an immediate impact on the counselling services provided at the Georgetown, Waterfront, Atlantic Police Academy, and West Prince campuses. Additionally, activities included self-care training with resident staff, a mental health awareness program, a student help center, and behavioral intervention teams. Mr. Speaker, I'm really disappointed that the honourable member didn't reach out to me before her line of questioning yesterday, but I am pleased to provide this clarification today. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
No one else? And for our first question, I'll call upon the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Late yesterday, on the eve of the budget, government quietly and discreetly announced that after months of misinformation and delay, it has once again changed course on its mobile mental health units. Now, Island EMS will be in charge of running these mobile units instead of Health PEI, as we were previously told. Question to the Premier. The other day, you asked us to take political rhetoric out of mental health. But how do you explain this sudden change beyond a political attempt to put a Band-Aid over your government's inaction on this mental health crisis?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question and the way it's posed. I think the minister did an interview actually on Wednesday, Mr. Speaker. I think the story actually didn't get published until Thursday, I believe. So I don't think there was any sinister attempt to hide this. I think it's no secret, Mr. Speaker, that we've been working to try to improve the delivery of mental health and addiction services here in this province, Mr. Speaker, and we're really trying to make sure that this service, much needed, long awaited, Mr. Speaker, is rolled out. We know from our experience, Mr. Speaker, that we need an integrated model for delivery of mental health and addiction services in this province, and I just really anxious, Mr. Speaker, to get this service operational because it's long overdue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. For months, the Premier and his ministers have been sort of consistently inconsistent on how these units are going to work. First, we were told that police would be involved in every call, and then the Premier said perhaps not. Then we found out that the research project that was conducted prior to the launch of these units only asked 4 people 4 questions, and now this change of management. A question to the Minister of Health and Wellness. Last week, my colleague from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke asked you for an update on these units. And you told her, and I quote, "We're getting very close to the point that it will be rolled out." But you did not give any indication that there would be changes, including the one about who would be running these units. When did you first find out that Island EMS would be managing these mobile mental health units, and has a contract been signed with Island EMS?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to express my appreciation to the staff who have been working on this project, on this initiative for Islanders for an extended time period, Mr. Speaker. With regard to, it's always been looked at, and it will be a partnership, Mr. Speaker. It is mental health led, and it is about Islanders. With regard to the honourable member's question, if a contract has been signed, my understanding as of this morning, no, it has not. But if anything changes on that, Mr. Speaker, I'll certainly bring that information back if I'm inaccurate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Official Opposition.
Thanks, Speaker. For a government that preaches the importance of consultation, something I would absolutely support, there seems to be almost none involved in this file. Just a frenzied attempt to get this thing off the ground without considering the impacts on Islanders in crisis and the healthcare workers that the Minister just praised so lavishly. Question to the Minister. When did you contact unions whose members are affected by this change to let them know it was going to happen?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with regard to contact with the unions, Mr. Speaker, there have been meetings going on for an extended time period with the various unions that will be a partner, staff who will be a partner in this initiative. Mr. Speaker, even as of 8 o'clock this morning, there was a meeting between Health PEI and staff, and we are moving forward on this. And the last information that I had, Mr. Speaker, with regard to how that meeting this morning went, it was very positive. The staff members are anxious to get out to help Islanders, as they always have been, Mr. Speaker. But one of the things I think that we have to look at, and we have to, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's announcement leaves me with even more questions and concerns than I had before about how Islanders will access the care they need when they're in a mental health crisis. A question to the Minister. How will Island EMS, a private company leading these units, impact the way that mobile units operate? And will Islanders potentially end up having to pay out of pocket just like they do when an ambulance comes?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, with regard to the question that the Honourable Member posed, will Islanders have to pay out of pocket? Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker. Our department will be looking after all costs associated with the response units. I think one of the things, too, though, Mr. Speaker, that we have to be very clear on, and the Honourable Member rightly used the word crisis, but we have to have a seamless transition that when that call does go in, Mr. Speaker, that it can be determined. Is this a crisis, which basically we're saying that it's an unstable situation that needs assistance, or is this an emergency that should be rerouted over to 911? And when I say emergency, Mr. Speaker, what I'm referring to there, is there a serious risk to health and or life? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. This government has time and again praised the dedication and the service of our healthcare workers, and again the Minister did it this morning. But what our office keeps hearing from these same workers is that behind the scenes they're not being treated with the respect and regard for the importance of the work that they need. It's hard to believe that a government would treat healthcare workers in this way. During a pandemic, in a province that so desperately needs to retain the healthcare staff that it already has. A question to the Premier. Your Minister has highlighted in his leadership, if I can say that, on this file, that he does not respect healthcare workers. No consultation, misinformation, delays, and widespread confusion. Premier, the promises of mobile healthcare units were in last year's budget, not today's budget, last year's budget. What can Islanders hope for in today's budget when it comes to mental health? No action, privatization, and a complete lack of respect for our healthcare workers?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think what people should expect and we'll see in this budget is a government that's committed to improving the service for Islanders in need of mental health and addiction services, Mr. Speaker. I would remind the member who's been in here a long time that 3 successive governments have been trying to roll this out, Mr. Speaker. I think that's long enough. It's time to get the service going, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're doing. I have told every health professional, whether they're nurses, doctors, LPNs, anyone through the system, Mr. Speaker, that I have no interest in privatization. I'm not looking to change any jobs, Mr. Speaker. I'm not looking to save any money. I'm looking to take the $1 billion we spend on healthcare services in this province, Mr. Speaker, and develop a system that is fair, efficient for all Islanders, Mr. Speaker. And I told the Nurses Union when I talked to the new president, Mr. Speaker, that there's 250 some vacancies here. I will pay gladly for every one of them as they're filled, Mr. Speaker, and even more if we need it. The nurses and professionals in this province, Mr. Speaker, are deeply respected by this government, Mr. Speaker, and I think if you actually talk to all of them, they would say that's a refreshing change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In our budget submission last year, the official opposition requested additional funding to extend dental care coverage to seniors and low-income Islanders with no private dental insurance coverage. This coverage would include extractions, fillings, and annual preventative appointments. A commitment was made to extend coverage, but as yet, this program has yet to be rolled out. It's a year later, Mr. Speaker, and Islanders are still waiting for compassionate and affordable dental coverage from this government. Question for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Is this another example of promising but not delivering?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. The honourable member is right. Last year in the 2021 provincial budget, it did include $1.25 million, which on an annualized basis, Mr. Speaker, would be $2.5 million. And this was certainly to enhance the health care for low-income Islanders and seniors. And the expectation, Mr. Speaker, is that this program will launch in July of 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Well, as we just heard, the commitment we had originally been told was 1.5, but 1.25 would work as well if it was actually spent, Mr. Speaker. This program isn't up and running. A new budget is imminent. So a question to the Minister, what did you do with those allocated funds if you didn't spend them on seniors and low-income Islanders?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will reiterate that it was 2.5 on an annual basis, 1.25 million in the budget from 2021. I would like to say also, Mr. Speaker, that our government has provided over 1,000 adults under a pilot project for low-income adults the accessibility to dental care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Mr. Speaker, if you're on social assistance and you have a toothache, you have to have your tooth pulled out. Doesn't matter where it is, you lose your tooth. That is not acceptable. It never has been acceptable, and this coverage was meant to help and address that need. Seniors and low-income Islanders need basic dental care. Why is this such a problem for this minister to get this program up and running?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't know the accuracy, and I would personally really hope that that is not accurate, that low-income Islanders and seniors automatically have extractions when, when other procedures, whether it's fillings or what have you, could take place. But as I had stated before, Mr. Speaker, this program will be up, it will be running in July of 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents of mine have raised issues with land surveys not being properly filed with the province. This often leads to disputes over property lines ending up in court. A review of the Land Survey Act has apparently been in the works since 2013. At that time, it was discovered that the Act's requirement for all surveys to be filed with the provincial surveyor was never enforced. Instead of starting to enforce this important requirement, it has been temporarily suspended for now 8 years. Question to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. When will this long overdue review of the Survey Act be complete, and when will amendments be brought to the House?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's work happening in the department as we speak. We are actually advertising for a new lead surveyor, a provincial surveyor. We just had one gentleman that is transferring to Ontario. But Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the work that is happening within the department to strengthen the regulations around the Land Act and with regards to making sure that surveys that are done correctly and recorded properly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke and the Opposition Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to briefly mention something that the Premier had asked if we as an opposition, listen to nurses or talk with nurses. And I can tell you I do that all the time, and not one has ever said to me, oh, what a refreshing change this government is. I've not heard that yet. Mr. Speaker, it would not be a legislative sitting if I did not stand up and ask this government yet again about the asbestos exposure at Tosh. If you will let me remind the House of the Tosh situation. Renovations began at Three Oaks Senior High School in 2016. During these renovations, there were at least 3 breaches in protocol when removing asbestos ceiling tiles. Parents were not told of this. The truth was uncovered through FOIP requests submitted by the opposition at the time and the now government. Parents of Tosh students, understandably concerned, lobbied government to create a registry. Question to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. Would you agree this is an accurate description of what occurred and why your government committed to creating the registry in the first place?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I would not think that it's an accurate description of what occurred. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member was in my office when I was Minister of Health with our Chief Public Health Officer, with our Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, went through the reports, rejected the information being provided by these highly qualified individuals. But, Mr. Speaker, this government made a commitment to having a registry for Tosh. This government is going to fulfill that promise, and it's coming very, very soon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Okay, that was a really interesting response because when I remember that meeting, I don't remember saying that none of that happened. And if it didn't happen, then I'm not sure, you know, that response really was very surprising to me. Of course it happened, and there was no question about whether or not those breaches happened. That's fact. Since taking power, this government has moved the elusive registry from health to education to transportation and infrastructure. I note back right around to the same minister, actually. Last spring, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure said the creation of the Tosh registry has been sent to an independent consultant. About a month ago, in a response to a written question, I was informed that the consultant has made recommendations for the registry. Question to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. Is Cabinet reviewing these recommendations, and when will the registry finally be created?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, yes, we did receive that report. It was reviewed not only by the Department of Transportation, the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the Chief Public Health Office, but, Mr. Speaker, also qualified individuals that work in the public service to make sure that anything that we do with regards to a registry, particularly that is going to pertain to young people, that they're protected, that there's privacy and confidential issues that are going to be involved with it as well, with pertaining to health records. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said previously, the announcement about the registry, exactly how it's going to be rolled out, how it's going to be contained, is coming within days. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke. The honourable member from Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A constituent of mine has a son who graduated in 2020. His son was diagnosed late in his educational career with a learning disability and did not start receiving appropriate accommodations and support until grade 11 because of backups in the system. As a result, online learning at the post-secondary level is causing great stress, anxiety, and has been horrible for his self-confidence. There is one important course that he has missed. His family is advocating that he return to grade 12 to take the course again, but the department will not allow it and has offered yet more online learning as a solution. Question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. When we are dealing with students living with disabilities, there are various accommodations made to support their learning. What accommodations has the department made to support graduates of 2020 living with learning disabilities?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm surprised that the honourable member is bringing this up. This is a very sensitive case with extenuating circumstances, and the honourable member knows that. I'm not going to speak to the specifics about it, but we are still working with that student, and we are committed to ensuring that we reach a positive conclusion whereby this student will have the necessary prerequisites to enter the university program. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Victoria Park.
I didn't ask about specifics, and I have permission to share this. Also, that is not the issue. The issue is he needs that learning. He missed the learning. Yes, we put grades based on what they did before, but students with learning disabilities, learning is important. It's not just about the marks. No student left behind is essentially the motto of the department. When we do not make accommodations for students who need them, we're leaving them behind. We need to give students what they need to succeed, and that looks different for everyone. The minister told me that no one else has made a request like this, yet I've heard from a few different families who tell me differently. Their children have repeated COVID repeated a grade due to COVID social and academic impacts. Question to the Minister, do you not agree that sometimes, just sometimes, we have to make exceptions to ensure that no student is left behind?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to educate this House. So once a student graduates, they are no longer entitled to programming within the public education system. It's important that we work across the education system to ensure consistent application of this criteria. So, Mr. Speaker, this specific case has come to my attention. I can assure this House that it is being looked into, and I am probably more than any file that I have as a minister in environment or in education, this is taking more of my time, and I am fully committed to ensuring that the student that the member speaks of will receive the required learning and prerequisites to enter this UPI student program as we would with any other student. The Act as such, as it's currently structured, does not allow for students to go back once they've graduated to finish courses. That being said, we are being flexible on this, and we want to ensure that this student does get the appropriate learning. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Premier, and I'm glad to hear that the Minister and himself have met with the health professionals that they talked about this morning. It seemed like they met with them after they made their decisions, but it's good to see they met with them. And even the political panel this morning was concerned about how this is all unfolding, and you know, and for very good reason. And they, they gave the two opposition parties lots of kudos for the questions that we've been asking, because this is important to Highlanders. You know, we heard yesterday the disturbing news regarding the mobile mental health teams. After many months of delay, we're now hearing that the service will be privatized. This is a real concern to Islanders who have long waited for this important service. We know, for instance, that a paramedic was online yesterday saying how concerned he was about the lack of consultation. Question to the Premier. What consultation did your government conduct in deciding to privatize the mobile mental health teams?
Honourable Premier.
When I talk about the political fear that gets struck in some days, Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what I'm referring to, Mr. Speaker. There's absolutely no privatization of any service, Mr. Speaker. Island EMS is one of the many partners that we have that provides health care services across the board, Mr. Speaker. And part of what we're trying to do within our overall delivery of primary health care service with our services pertaining to mental health and addictions, Mr. Speaker, is to have a more integrated system, Mr. Speaker, that includes all of the partners who do the important work, Mr. Speaker, along with those in health PEI, all those from a clinical perspective who are so important and contribute so greatly, Mr. Speaker. So, I would say to the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that you should be entertained by what goes on at the political panel level. I used to be a panelist, and I can say that, Mr. Speaker, but it's a poor place to get advice, Mr. Speaker, most days.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Well, you know, the Premier, Mr. Speaker, the Premier can poke fun and talk about his ideas and stuff and make fun of the political panel. I just alluded to them. We've been working on this for a long time, and we've been asking questions. And you want to make a joke about it, you go right ahead. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, it appears the decision to come out of has come out of nowhere, and the relevant groups who were impacted by this change have not been consulted until this morning or whenever they consulted them. We have heard from the nurses' unions. They came out against this and the change of this delivery. They even were the ones who called it privatization of service. So if it's not, it's great it's getting cleared now, but it's kind of after the fact. They have expressed multiple concerns regarding what this change could mean, leading many to think they weren't consulted. Question to the Premier. What consultations did your government have with the PEI Nurses Union regarding the move to privatize mobile mental service teams?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the delivery of service of health care, Mr. Speaker, whether it's primary, whether it's mental health and addictions, Mr. Speaker, is provided across the board by a number of different individuals, groups, and partners, Mr. Speaker. And throughout the process of trying to get to where we're at right now, Mr. Speaker, there's been ongoing conversations and talk. No one is trying to suggest that the nurses can't be part of this, Mr. Speaker. They're the biggest part of this, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do is stop sitting around talking about these services, Mr. Speaker, and start to deliver them. 3 successive governments have been trying to get these things going, Mr. Speaker. When is enough enough, Mr. Speaker? I hear people saying to me, why did you wait another 6 months, Mr. Speaker? If there's someone tonight calling with a mental health emergency, Mr. Speaker, I can't have someone tell them, wait 6 months, Mr. Speaker, I need to deal with it. That's the job I'm in, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to apologize for trying to help Islanders.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party, second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nobody's asking the Premier to apologize. We're just asking, he goes on about collaboration and all that kind of stuff. Well, obviously, they're collaborating after the fact. Like, hey, this is important stuff. Put it in place, but you should have spoke to the people before you made the announcement. Now, you can say what you want and spin it backwards. This is question period. You want to talk about politicizing things? We're in politics here. We're the opposition. We're the opposition. Okay? Mr. Speaker, the last Conservative government, which the Premier worked for, looked at the issue of privatizing health services and ultimately decided against it. To quote former Premier Binns, a wise man who knows when to give up on an idea, we looked at all the pros and cons and we rejected it.
Question?
We just felt that it wasn't going to work as well as a publicly funded, publicly administered system. We visited and we looked at it and we said no. A question to the Premier, will you do the following? Will you follow the lead of your former boss and reject privatization of health care?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have absolutely no interest in privatizing health care in this province, Mr. Speaker, and I likely wrote that for the Premier, Mr. Speaker, so I believe in it wholeheartedly, Mr. Speaker. And I would talk about the politicization of this, Mr. Speaker. For 11 years, Mr. Speaker, they talked about this. They didn't do it, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry if it offends them that I'm doing it, Mr. Speaker, that we're making action here for Islanders because it's long overdue, Mr. Speaker. I can't help what you didn't do, Mr. Speaker. I'm just trying to fix some of it over here. I can tell you that.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary-Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There certainly seems to be a self-inflicted growing confusion about this government's handling of mental health. For example, last fall, Islanders were told the mobile crisis unit would be rolled out in 2021. Here we are, April, still not there. In fact, we have seen lately, all we've seen is the news that the management of this service is going to be privatized with Island EMS instead of being managed by Health PEI, and the creation of a 1-800 number, which still hasn't been launched. Question to the Premier. In the name of transparency, Mr. Speaker, what is the plan for these mobile units, and who is actually creating this plan?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if there's confusion, I can tell you it's from the opposition standpoint, Mr. Speaker. For 3 weeks in here, why don't you get the mobile health clinics going, Mr. Speaker? How come they can't get going? Now we're starting and they're saying, why are you doing the mobile health thing? But what do you have the benefit of arguing both ends of this, Mr. Speaker. That's your job. My job is to try to roll them out and serve Islanders, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're doing.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary-Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, and therein lies the problem, whether it's mismanagement or whether it's miscommunication. First, they choose a model of delivery integrating police into these mobile units against expert advice recommended by the Canadian Mental Health Association. Now we hear this government is moving to privatize for a for-profit company the key component of mental health services. This seems like a real simplification of governance decision-making, Mr. Speaker. The Premier says he has no intent of privatization, but how does he explain a private, for-profit company managing Health PEI's employees?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not for profit, and I would remind the Honourable Member, because he forgets a lot of things over there, but he signed the deal with Medavie, Mr. Speaker, that brought them here, Mr. Speaker, so you should know all about it. You're the one that brought them in to deliver health care services, Mr. Speaker. You did all of that, so you shouldn't forget that now. I know you have amnesia when you get into opposition, and you certainly learn an awful lot about how easy it is to fix things over there, Mr. Speaker, but I would remind him of that. And I would again say to all Islanders, Mr. Speaker, that we need an integrated system of health care delivery here. We need to stop worrying about silos, Mr. Speaker, and turf protection, and we have to all work together, because when we do that, Islanders get best served, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're trying to do here.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary-Inverness, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would remind the Premier that ambulance services are actually not part of the Canada Health Act, Mr. Speaker. Other than the delivery model of service for mobile mental health services led by a private company, would the Premier be aware, would this pass a health accreditation process by Accreditation Canada, and has this been confirmed?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what now Island EMS will do is they will take the call and they will dispatch, Mr. Speaker, the services as required. I think that is a very positive step when it comes to the mental health and addiction services of Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. Big issue that everyone has been telling me, Mr. Speaker, for the last year is trying to get into the system to access services. We're trying to make that simpler, Mr. Speaker, and easier. We're not trying to suggest for a second that we have a perfect system. It will need to evolve. It will need to be evaluated. It will need to change as we learn more about this, Mr. Speaker. But at the root of it all has to be a better service delivery for the people who need it, Mr. Speaker, when they need it, and that's what we're trying to do in this regard.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
The Premier apologized this week. He apologized for his decision to politicize access to mental health services, and I appreciate that. But he did not apologize to the people of Prince Edward Island's government for the lack of action on improving mental health services. He did not apologize for breaking his promise on the new mental health facility. He did not apologize for the short-sighted decision to limit the access of Unit 9 during the pandemic. He did not apologize for closing the puck at Hillsborough Hospital when the minister had promised it would stay open. If he had apologized for the complete lack of action on improving these important life-saving services, it would have seemed a bit more sincere. Mr. Speaker, question to the Premier. At the risk of sounding too political, many Islanders are wondering, when will the new mental health hospital be completed?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're working hard to complete the plans, Mr. Speaker, of the mental health campus, which will be a big component, but only one component of our mental health and addiction services here in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. It is only one part of it. It's a big part of it, and we need to get that rolling. And I believe we're on track for 2024 or something to complete that major project, Mr. Speaker, which will probably, by the time it's completed, be in excess of $200 million with the cost of products and increases as we move forward over the next couple of years, Mr. Speaker. It's an investment that government wants to make and is already committed to making, and I'd like to get it going as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker. But I would again say that's just one component of the mental health and addiction services here at Prince Edward Island, and we need an integrated system that can help Islanders when they need it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Addiction services are crucial to Islanders and their families. There are many examples of neglect over the past little while. I won't dwell on each one, but I'll point out one today, and it's absolute neglect of Deacon House. I recently visited Deacon House and had an opportunity to tour the shelter that is managed by Health PEI and serves people battling addictions. Inside, there are cracks in the walls, holes in the baseboard, molds in the kitchen and bathrooms, and the ceiling wall paint is peeling off. The beds are old cots. Inside, there are...
Question?
And the outside is in complete disrepair. This is not an appropriately maintained facility for vulnerable Islanders.
Question?
Is the Premier also apologizing for this level of neglect?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that we all realize in here that Deacon House is probably at the end of its service life, Mr. Speaker, and we need a better option for that. And I know the minister and his staff are working towards trying to find a better option, Mr. Speaker, while at the same time trying to continue to deliver the important services to those individuals who are being served in there, Mr. Speaker. But I think I would be joined by 26 other individuals in here by saying that I think Deacon House is at the end of its life expectancy, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty, your second supplementary.
I'm not sure what find a better solution means. That means that you're going to fix Deacon House. You're going to people stay there. They need this support. And you talk about future 2024 and things that are going on. This support needs to be done now. People use this facility, and I'll be tabling pictures to show that. So when can Deacon House and the Islanders it serves expect the help they so obviously desperate need?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member doesn't need to table photos because he's not the only one that cares about these issues, Mr. Speaker. We care about them deeply, Mr. Speaker. We go there. I understand the situation of Deacon House, and as I said, it's at the end of its life expectancy, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe that it's a building worth renovating, Mr. Speaker. I think we have to find another better option, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're working towards. At the same time, it would serve no purpose to close the building now and move these individuals out. I want the individuals who are there to get the service they need. There's good service provided there, in spite of the fact the facility is at the end of its lifespan, Mr. Speaker. And I know the staff at Health and Wellness and Health PEI and others are working to address that issue, Mr. Speaker, with a high level of importance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty, or Charlottetown, Winslow.
Close. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just before Christmas, the former Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy had a big announcement for the expansion of the West Royalty Elementary School. As part of that announcement, he was joined by the federal counterparts because of the funding in place for the federal government's COVID-19 resiliency stream. Now, one of the conditions, of course, is that the funding has to be, or the work has to be started and completed by late in the year. Question to the Minister, the current Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. Can you give us an update on the project at the West Royalty Elementary expansion?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So yes, Mr. Speaker, plans are proceeding to renovate or expand the West Royalty School, Mr. Speaker, to the tune of $6.7 million, which will include 10 new classrooms, resource guidance rooms, as well as a large activity room, essentially a half a gymnasium. Mr. Speaker, the architectural design work is pretty much complete, and we look forward to moving forward on this project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is great news, Minister. Now, of course, the timelines are tight on this program. As I said, the work has to be completed in this fall. A further question to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. I do see that the tenders did close this week on the addition. I'm just kind of curious if maybe you can provide an update on that.
The honourable member of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the actual public tenders are going to be awarded here fairly soon. I would suspect once they're all in, evaluated, that they'll be awarded by the end of March, early April. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Okay, again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is great to hear. Having children attend West Royalty Elementary School, it was a constituent who brought it forward to me, Mr. Speaker, that whether it's COVID-19 or just parent schedules in the morning, a lot of students are dropped off, Mr. Speaker, at the school by their parents, which can sometimes create a little bit of a backlog, and especially going in through a residential zone. I'm just curious if your department would ever look at maybe changing the current structure, Mr. Speaker, of where the bus drop-off is and also where the parents are dropping the students off. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And honourable member, thank you very much for that question. I did actually have the opportunity recently to go out and look at the site where the expansion is going to take place. I was a little bit alarmed by the amount of traffic and the number of cars dropping their children off. Meanwhile, we have a bus system that we're paying for to drop children off, pick them up and drop them off at the school. But Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of the situation we had in Stratford as well at our schools there, and we did have to make some modifications. So, Mr. Speaker, part of the work that will begin before the actual construction of the expansion takes place will be to look at and revise the drop-off zones, because it's paramount in our department that the safety of these children being dropped off is taken into account. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before we move forward any farther, I feel like we really just have to address the elephant in the room around mental health care in Prince Edward Island. Regardless of who answers the phone, who directs the call, or who shows up to treat Islanders in crisis, the real problem is that there is nowhere good to take people when they need help. Question to the Minister, when will the psychiatric urgent care clinic at Hillsborough Hospital reopen? When is this government finally going to put in place the frontline services that are the real supports that Islanders need?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And one thing I really want to do is get back very briefly and emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that we've heard from the opposition, from the third party, continuously here this morning, the word privatization. This is not privatization. With regard to the psychiatric urgent care clinics, Mr. Speaker, they were put in place in response early in the pandemic as a COVID response. And the objective of that was to divert emergency department patients to an appropriate location. Mr. Speaker, yes, there have been changes to that, but let's look at the QEH emergency department. The changes that have been made there, it involves additional crisis response nurse, an LPN, and as well, Mr. Speaker, a new social worker. And the progress, the success of this change is being monitored on an ongoing basis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park. Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Social Development and Housing said regarding grandparents raising their grandchildren that the department will work with families to ensure there are appropriate housing supports available. The minister has known for well over a month that my constituent is in no way receiving appropriate housing supports. I don't want talking points, Minister. Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. A 3-bedroom apartment in Summerside for $577 a month does not exist. Will you raise the rent cap on social assistance clients to one that reflects the cost of living in Summerside?
The honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to housing, the Department of Social Development and Housing takes these issues very, very seriously. And Mr. Speaker, the department has been working with the member's constituent on an ongoing basis for that entire month. And the member should talk to her constituent and find out what's going on there, because we are going to help her. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to supporting those on social assistance to make sure that they can have the housing they need, Mr. Speaker, give it time. Very soon, in fact today, we might find some good news in that front. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot, final question.
Mr. Speaker, the member would be wise to talk to his department, because while he was in this House making that announcement, I was getting texts that she couldn't get a call back from the department minister. My constituent has been providing care for her grandchildren 10 days a month for years. Not enough to increase her rent cap, but too much to be eligible for the seniors housing program. Question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. This is a gap. Will you create seniors housing that reflects the reality that many seniors are also caregivers?
The honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I received an email from my department 1 minute ago, Mr. Speaker, who said that they've been in contact with their constituent and they're continuing to work to support her. So they are. They're doing their job, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what the problem is that this opposition has with our civil servants and the great work they do. So, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the gaps, Mr. Speaker, we're working to address them. But the thing is, and I said this in my response yesterday, if there's a senior that's looking after their grandchildren and they need to have that space, they're treated as a family, and we find housing for them on that basis. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're working to help people, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to find solutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of question period. Statements by ministers? Oh. Do we have one?
Yep.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last fall in the Legislative Assembly, we passed amendments to strengthen our Highway Traffic Act to make our roads safer for Islanders. Today, I'm pleased to say that those amendments will be coming into force effective tomorrow, March 13th, 2021. Mr. Speaker, for anyone convicted of impaired driving that continues to operate a motor vehicle, the new regulations add an additional fine of $1,500 to $2,000, a further 1-year suspension of the driver's license, and increased vehicle impound times. These new laws are in addition to penalties in place for any driver that violates the terms and conditions of the Ignition Interlock program. Mr. Speaker, there is no excuse for anyone to get behind the wheel of a motor vehicle if they are impaired by alcohol or drugs. We need to stop drinking and driving behavior in the province, and Islanders need to know that impaired driving will not be tolerated. This new legislation change is one of the many steps our department has taken on the issue, but I must be clear that we all have a role to play if we want to put an end to impaired driving. With your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight two of our other highway safety changes that come into force tomorrow. One is increased penalties for excessive speeding. Drivers caught going 50 kilometers an hour or more over the speed limit will be subject to greater penalties. The other change is that drivers must yield the right-of-way to a transit bus when it is re-entering traffic. This applies when a transit bus is stopped to pick up passengers within a municipality with a speed limit of 60 kilometers or less, and the bus re-enters the closest lane of traffic. Our ultimate goal is to create safer driving conditions for all Islanders. Mr. Speaker, these new laws were passed in this Legislative Assembly last fall, and I want to thank the law enforcement community for their support and all the work that they do to implement and enforce these laws. Thank you.
The honourable member from Summerside Centre Drive.
That's a good one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly harsher penalties are one tool that we can use to try to address drunk driving and speeding issues here, Minister, but there's a great deal more that has to be done in this file. I look forward to seeing some more education put out there so that the Islanders are aware of the impacts that their speeding can have on other Islanders. I would also like to see the culture that has been ingrained here on Prince Edward Island addressed by the Minister and his department. So while I applaud the effort to try to curb drunk driving and speeding issues, there's still a great deal of work that needs to be done in this file. Thank you.
The honourable member from Larry Inverness, the third party whip.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Minister for working towards trying to alleviate this particular issue, but I will say it tends to be a bit of a hallmark of this government to be miscommunicating, so I really encourage them to make sure that they get the communications right, get that out to the public so people understand these changes, Mr. Speaker.
End of statements. Minister statements. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the Social Assistance Dental Benefits Policy dated April 2009. This policy indicates that dental benefits are restricted to the most essential service to relieve pain and infection, which are extraction for toothache or periodontal infection, and do not include preventative or restorative services, including fillings. I move, seconded by the honourable member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall I carry?
Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table 6 pictures taken in February 2021 of Deacon House Shelter outlining the lack of care and attention to this important facility. And I move, seconded by Tignish Pomeroy, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Honourable member, can you pick another seconder?
O'Leary Inverness.
Shall I carry? Any more document? The honourable premier.
Mr. Speaker, by command of Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor, I beg leave to table the Public Departments Act Transfer Order EC 2021-54 and EC 2021-65 in accordance with the Public Departments Act, and I move, seconded by the Honourable Government House Leader, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall I carry? Any more documents to be tabled? No? Reports by committees? Introduction of government bills? Government motions. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I present herewith a message from Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor, which said message is signed by Her Honour.
Honourable members, I shall ask the clerk to read the message from Her Honour. Honourable members, could we please stand while the message is being read?
Dear Mr. Speaker, Her Honour the Honourable Antoinette Perry, Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Prince Edward Island, hereby transmits the estimates of revenue and expenditure required to carry on the public services of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022, and also until the passage of the estimates for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023, in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution Act 1867 and the Prince Edward Island Terms of Union. Her Honor recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Her Honor, the Honorable Antoinette Perry.
Shall it carry? Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, by command of Her Honor the Lieutenant Governor, I present herewith the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the province of Prince Edward Island for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. And I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Finance, that said estimates be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Finance, that consideration of the estimates in Committee of the Whole House be added to the orders of the day until such times as they are dispatched.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that motion number 27 be now read.
Shall it carry?
Motion 27. The Honourable Minister of Finance moves, seconded by the Honourable Premier, the following motion. Be it resolved that this House approve, in general, the budgetary policy of government.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. Bonjour, Quay. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise in this Assembly and present the planned spending of the government for the fiscal year of 21-22. Less than a year ago, I rose in this House to present our province's operating budget for the fiscal year of 2021. As we know, Mr. Speaker, the process of budget making is complex. It relies on all kinds of ever-shifting variables, recent history, analysis of trends in spending and revenue, an outlining of programming and infrastructure needs, an understanding of the expectations of our citizens. And most importantly, budget making must reflect an appreciation of the kind of province and community we wish to establish and leave behind for those who follow us. Budget 2020-2021 was especially complex. It was a budget based on uncertainties, assumptions, what-ifs, and best estimations. It was early days in the pandemic, and we had no idea how long it might last or what its consequences might be in terms of human lives, in terms of our economic future and well-being. In last year's budget, the projected deficit was $172 million. I'm pleased to report that despite record investment on programs and infrastructure, and despite unprecedented support to individuals, nonprofits, businesses, and communities, we expect to close the books on the current fiscal year with a deficit of $120 million, $50 million below the projected amount. Mr. Speaker, this result is a credit to the people of Prince Edward Island. No community of people in all North America has been so compliant in their respective areas as Islanders have been with the protocols prescribed by Chief Public Health Officer, the heroic Dr. Heather Morrison, and our dedicated team. It is also a credit to the workers and leadership from businesses and organizations across PEI who adjusted and kept going. Our coming together by staying apart has meant that we have been able to enjoy liberties not dreamed of elsewhere. We have been blessed, Mr. Speaker. Our economy has survived, and true to their neighborly spirit, Islanders have dug in by supporting local businesses. True, there have been some sectors that have suffered disproportionately, and this budget will address some of those issues. But on the whole, our economy has done well, and that has helped us ensuring that the COVID-19 pandemic will go down in history as an economic shock and not a dire economic blow. But that's not to suggest that we are out of the woods by any means. Successful recovery will require the careful intervention of government and the generous support of Islanders. It will mean paying closer attention to the social and mental health impacts of COVID-19. For the coming year, we have projected revenue of $2.39 billion and spending of $2.5 billion, for a projected deficit of $112 million. Mr. Speaker, Islanders are noted for their perpetual optimism, but tempering that optimism is an equal dose of practicality. We are hopeful, but we are not naive. We know that the COVID pandemic will continue to present the greatest challenge to the near-term outlook for this province. To date, we have been fortunate, recording fewer than 150 cases of the virus, with no hospitalizations and no deaths. Despite this, we must not let down our guard. Until a sufficiently high rate of vaccine is achieved, we cannot be confident that we have wrestled this virus and its various strains into submission. This must be our primary goal. In the meantime, we can take comfort in the fact that the underlying fundamentals of the island economy have remained strong, even in the face of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, allow me to share some of the highlights of the current PEI economy and offer some basis for our projections for the future. Prince Edward Island led the country in population growth for the 5th year in a row. This past year, our population grew 1.5%. We have reached 160,000 people, a target we originally hoped to attain by the end of 2022. Our employment has started to rebound, with 95% of jobs back to where they were before COVID-19. We still have much to do, but our workers have been the basis of our success in the past and will be in the future. 2 of our 3 major industries have thus far fared well. Farm cash receipts increased 7% in 2020 to total $605 million, an all-time high. And despite a late start and soft prices, our fishers did relatively well. Lower fuel costs and some labor cost assistance helped with the bottom line. Exports, led largely by food processing and the biosector, science sector, were up by almost 1% in 2020, reaching just over $1.5 billion, the second fastest growth rate among the Canadian provinces. Retail sales on the island grew by 1.5% in 2020, and wholesale trade increased 3.2% to reach $1.07 billion, the fastest growth in all of Canada. Both the number and the value of building permits have grown in every town, village, and community across this province. Investment in building construction increased 10.7% in 2020 to a total just over $851 million. Housing completions increased 77% to 1,359 units, the most completed in a single year since 1974 and the 3rd best year on record. All of these factors combined with our low case numbers and our aggressive vaccination program bode well for a speedy and comprehensive recovery for the PEI economy. Canada's 6 chartered banks and leading economic think tanks, including the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council and the Conference Board of Canada, are predicting an average growth rate of 4% for the PEI economy in the coming year. Mr. Speaker, before I get into the substance of my budget address, allow me to speak briefly about some of the lessons that we have all learned over the past year. A year ago, I was like most, preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best. We were all anticipating the return to normal. That word was on everyone's lips. It's remarkable how seldom we hear that word a year later. Certainly our anticipation of this disruption eventually being over is in no way diminished. But I think we all realize that what we knew as normal is unlikely to return in precisely the same form. We have been changed, Mr. Speaker. As the great American author Kurt Vonnegut has said, history is merely a list of surprises. It can only prepare us to be surprised yet again. We have learned many lessons from COVID-19. Some were practical, like the lessons we learned about the design and delivery of certain government services and programs to support islanders. We learned that by working in partnership with our federal government, we can ensure national support that met the needs of this province. We also learned the importance of our frontline workers and are thankful for their dedication and resilience that they have shown in the past year. But many of the lessons we have learned have greater significance. These lessons that are far more fundamental to our being and are far more heartfelt. Over the course of this past year, many of us have had the time and took the time to reflect on what's important in our lives. to think about what it means to be part of a community and to be part of a family. We all want the same things. We want to live in a place that's safe and secure, both physically and emotionally. We want to feel that there is a future for our children and for our grandchildren. We want the assurance that what we have built will live on beyond us. We want to feel that what we built is worthy of passing on. We want our family, friends, and neighbors to be healthy and happy and to share in the graces and blessings of life. Mr. Speaker, those are the values that have prevailed over the past year when we were forced to hit the pause button of our lives. And those are the same values, beliefs, and desires that shape and define this budget that I share with my colleagues in this House and the people of Prince Edward Island. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 crisis has had the dual effect of giving people more comfort in using alternative access to services and providing the impetus for government to move more of its services online. The feedback has been clear. Islanders, communities, and businesses want simpler, faster, and easier access to government services. Islanders have told us that they need simplicity and convenience, answers when they want them, options beyond in-person visits to government offices, less repetition and redundancy, and government to better anticipate their needs. In the interest of further expanding the use of virtual care technologies, the Department of Health and Wellness has entered into an agreement with Health Canada, which earmarks $2.7 million improvements in virtual care and health services to Islanders. Recognizing the increasingly diverse service needs of Islanders, the government has developed a new corporate service entity, Service PEI. As a center of service expertise, Service PEI will put Islanders at the heart of service design and delivery and simplify access to government information and services. It will reduce wait times at Access PEI and further develop French language services. Building on the success of the contactless pilot offered by Montague Access PEI site, Contact PEI will be established within Service PEI. Contact PEI will offer Islanders the option of accessing service and information via the telephone. Mr. Speaker, we know that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on several groups and demographics, especially women. In recognition that some of this imbalance may be a result of systemic bias inherent in policies and programs within government, we have created a new gender and diversity analysis position within the Interministerial Women's Secretariat. This resource will increase the capacity for all departments across government to provide the important lens of gender equality and diversity to policy and program initiatives. This budget also includes a $130,000 increase to the Interministerial Women's Secretariat Grant Program, providing funding to organizations who offer programs to benefit women and girls in Prince Edward Island. This increase will support projects that enhance awareness, education, and social action on women's legal, health, social, and economic equality issues. Mr. Speaker, we are forever grateful to our police services, first responders, firefighters, and correctional officers who are specifically tasked with protecting our safety. Accordingly, government will provide a $60,000 increase to the annual grant to the Prince Edward Island Firefighters Association to support the more than 1,000 volunteer firefighters across the province. This is a 155% increase in the training and administration budget for the volunteer organization. The additional funds will ensure the Provincial Fire School is well positioned to recruit and train future generations of firefighters. The COVID-19 pandemic also highlighted the vulnerability of certain populations, including those who are incarcerated. In response, we will invest an additional $148,000 to correction services to add a nurse practitioner and a licensed practical nurse to provide primary health care services for offenders in correctional facilities. This past year, members of the opposition and members of the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development drew our attention to the need for additional funding for legal aid and the Human Rights Commission. In response, we will increase the budget of legal aid by $285,000, providing low-income Islanders with better access to justice to support their legal needs. Government continues to support the important work of the Human Rights Commission by providing funding to support its mandate of eliminating barriers and preventing discrimination. This budget includes an additional $50,000 to the Commission's funding. Mr. Speaker, there is no singular issue of greater importance to Islanders than healthcare services. It commands the greatest share of our budget and is the subject of much of the debate in this chamber. Despite its many merits, we know that there are areas in our healthcare system that need improvement. In her address 2 weeks ago, Her Honor outlined many of the structural changes that are taking place in the delivery of healthcare, which will break down barriers, remove obstructions, reduce the silos, improve communication, and focus attention and resources where they need to be focused, on the patient. This budget outlines innovations and new initiatives in 5 broad areas of healthcare: access to care, primary care, seniors care, mental wellness and addictions, and virtual care. Mr. Speaker, government is committed to ensuring Islanders have access to their primary health care needs close to home. Our 2 major referral hospitals and our 4 rural hospitals provide a network of primary care services in all parts of our province. In partnership with Health PEI, other government departments, healthcare providers, communities, and Islanders, the Department of Health and Wellness will roll out a primary care strategy. The strategy will transform the way primary care is delivered in PEI, with particular emphasis on rural health, on seniors care, virtual care, and mental health. Funding for this strategy includes $4.4 million for primary care in 2021-22 and $3.6 million in 22-23. These funds will help build 5 new medical homes and medical neighborhoods to meet the healthcare needs of Islanders across the province. These medical homes and medical neighborhoods will be established in West Prince, East Prince, Kings County, and 2 in Queens County this fiscal year. An additional $1 million has been designated to provide support for individuals with diabetes in our province, a request brought forward by the official opposition. Mr. Speaker, we will also be increasing funding for the provincial drug formulary by $1.5 million, and we'll be working with the Chief Public Health Office to implement a safe consumption site with initial funding of $250,000. As indicated in this throne speech, government has launched a multi-year recruitment and retention program designed to develop, attract, and retain nursing professionals here on PEI. This year, government will make the initial investment in the five-year, $5 million fund for recruitments of LPNs, RNs, and nurse practitioners by providing student debt forgiveness for those nursing professionals who work in our province. We'll also make the initial investment towards $2.5 million mentorship and training fund for nursing professionals currently working in Prince Edward Island. In addition, we will invest $250,000 to support RCWs to upgrade to LPNs and LPNs to upgrade to RNs. We will also provide funding to cover the costs for language testing for RNs and LPNs who choose to work in PEI and whose first language is not English. Mr. Speaker, over the past 2 years, we have made several investments to ensure our seniors are able to stay in their homes as long as possible. Programs designed to achieve this are the home renovation, seniors home repair, and the seniors safe at home programs. Over the next 3 years, we will invest an additional $2.7 million to these 3 programs, doubling the grant thresholds. And for Islanders, that means the eligible grant amount for seniors safe at home will increase from $5,000 to $10,000. Seniors home repair program threshold will increase from $2,000 to $4,000. PI home repair program funding for seniors and families in need will increase from $6,000 to $12,000. And PEI home repair program funding for those with disabilities will increase from $8,000 to $16,000. These changes mean a total of $678,800 in new spending will be committed this year to these programs. Government is also working to ensure services in both the community and the health system are designed to maintain health, promote long-term wellness, and to meet the needs of older Islanders who require care. Our policy and program efforts in the area of seniors care are guided by 2 complementary initiatives. This budget includes an investment of $4.1 million to implement the recommendations in the Seniors Health and Wellness Action Plan and the Seniors Health Services Review. This includes $2.7 million for our home care programs and introduction of new programs for seniors living in their own homes. And further, Mr. Speaker, this budget includes $1.5 million for the shingles vaccine to all Islanders over the age of 65. Because of the urgency of completing our COVID-19 vaccination program, the shingles vaccination program will get underway in January of 2022. It will be one of the most comprehensive shingles vaccines in the country. The third-party caucus have been strong advocates on this issue, which was a platform commitment of our government. Our government is committed to improving access to both acute and community-based mental health and addiction services. We have pledged $700,000 to increase resources for the psychiatric urgent care, adult and child inpatient acute psychiatric care services. Also, $500,000 has been included in this budget to implement the single point of access for mental health services. In addition to these major initiatives, we continue to invest in developing the next stage of the new mental health campus. This budget also includes an investment this year of $3 million to establish the PEI Center for Mental Wellbeing. The center will bring together the many partners engaged in the delivery of mental health and addiction services and will provide government essential feedback and guidance to ensure our mental health services are responsive to the needs of the community. Mr. Speaker, our Cancer Treatment Center at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the satellite unit at the Prince County Hospital provide essential services that at one time were available out of province only for Islanders. Mr. Speaker, this budget includes funding for the addition of 1 medical oncologist to bring our complement to 4 medical oncologists to better meet the needs of island cancer patients. Access to midwifery services has been a top priority of the official opposition, and I'm pleased that we can work together towards implementation of this important service. This budget includes $250,000 this year and a commitment for a total of $500,000 over 2 years to complete preparatory work and to support the recruitment of midwifery specialists. Mr. Speaker, shortly after the global pandemic was declared, our Premier invited a number of Islanders from all areas of the province and all walks of life to form the Premier's Council on Recovery and Growth. The Council received more than 1,100 suggestions and recommendations from Islanders, including the implementation of a social support system that would provide a basic annual income. Such an undertaking would require changes to federal tax and employment programs, would also require the pooling of resources currently dedicated to a number of provincial and federal support programs. We have committed to work with our federal counterparts to explore options and possibilities for such a program. In February 2020, the Department of Social Development and Housing launched a secure income pilot program to assist long-term recipients of social assistance with severely limited capacity to work. This program has seen some early success for participants. And this budget includes $2.3 million to expand the program to include Islanders with multiple barriers to employment and island youth who have aged out of care and require additional supports as they transition toward greater independence. Mr. Speaker, this budget also includes an additional $1.1 million to support increases to shelter allowance for both assured income and social assistance clients. This, combined with the food allowance increase that was implemented in January of 2020, will ensure that those who are in greatest need are able to attain appropriate housing and live their lives with the dignity, comfort, and security. Mr. Speaker, government is also investing an additional $5.6 million in the energy efficiency equipment program to provide extra supports for Islanders to transition from carbon-emitting fuel sources. This funding will be specifically targeted towards increasing the number and size of rebates available to low-income Islanders to allow every household to reduce its carbon footprint by weaning off fossil fuels and other carbon-emitting fuel types. This will also further advance our efforts to achieve net zero carbon emissions. Mr. Speaker, the future and vitality of our province is not only dependent on ensuring healthy Islanders, but is also maintaining healthy communities. Of course, over the years, our understanding of what constitutes a community has changed. At one time, a community's boundaries were defined by how far a horse could walk in half a day. The boundaries of our one-room school districts were determined by the distance a 6-year-old might be expected to walk one way to and from school, roughly 4 kilometers. Today, of course, these notions of community are viewed as outdated and irrelevant. Yet we are humans, we are social animals, and we continue to need to be grounded. We need to belong to a community of people, to be part of a group that shares a common geography, but also shares a common hope for the future and similar aspirations for our children and our grandchildren. The 2021-22 budget contains a number of initiatives designed to strengthen communities, provide local councils, governing agencies, and nonprofit and volunteer groups the resources to better design and deliver services desired by their citizens and neighbors. This budget provides an additional $200,000 to create a new community fund that will strengthen local governance in our not-for-profit organizations. The fund will increase engagement and participation by young islanders and other underrepresented groups in our nonprofit organizations. We will also invest $50,000 in new spending to establish a pilot program to facilitate greater coordination of services among neighboring municipalities through the use of the municipal shared services agreements. These agreements will benefit our small municipalities by reducing duplication of some services while encouraging innovative approaches to service delivery for their residents. Mr. Speaker, since 2017-2018 operating budget, the annual housing services budget has increased by $20 million. And although our government has made great strides with investments in this area in the past 2 years, we know there is still work to be done. This year, our government will invest $8 million in over 1,150 mobile vouchers to ensure islanders have access to affordable housing that is close to employment, transportation, education, and their family support systems. We will also support private developers through rent supplement agreements to ensure people needing social housing have access to units with an investment of $4.2 million this year. Mr. Speaker, the Affordable Housing Development Program has also increased the number of affordable housing units in our province. For those islanders who are facing or at risk of facing homelessness, our government will continue to offer support through Community Outreach Centre, Bedford Mcdonald House, and Smith Lodge with $1.5 million in operating grants. In addition, we will increase funding for Blooming House Women's Shelter by $80,000 to a total of $200,000 in the upcoming fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, we must celebrate and support the diversity of our province every chance we get. We must invest an additional $200,000 with Peers Alliance to expand programming. In addition, we will support Pride PEI to continue their work serving our 2S LGBTQIA+ community through celebrating and promoting the diversity of gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression in our province. We know that addressing bias in our life is only possible when we are informed. The Black Cultural Society in the past has brought awareness to our province on issues facing our BIPOC community. Investments to the Black Cultural Society will increase this year to $100,000, and we will work with the Society to approve a project under the Public Art Fund as a memorial for the bog. Mr. Speaker, there is no community more important in the history of our province than our First Nation. The Mi'kmaq have shown us what community truly means. In addition to furthering the work of reconciliation, including a commitment to treaty education, our budget includes $200,000 for a total of $700,000 to support Ulnaway and its work of moving towards a better tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, there are countless of nonprofit volunteer organizations in every community all across Prince Edward Island. Parent-teacher groups, Lions clubs, Rotary clubs, women's institutes, minor hockey organizations, the list is endless. Many of these organizations rely on raffle sales and lottery draws to raise revenues to support and deliver services and infrastructure that might not otherwise be available. In recognition of the valuable work that these not-for-profit organizations do for their communities, This budget will eliminate the charitable lottery fee for community and volunteer-based nonprofit fundraisers with prizes less than $5,000. In addition, our government will continue to sign a multi-year funding agreement with NGO and community organizations to relieve the worry of wondering about funding each year. We recognize these many groups and individuals who work without expectation of reward to enhance the community experience for the rest of us. Mr. Speaker, there are 24 volunteer community-based watershed groups across the province that do incredibly valuable work on behalf of the people of Prince Edward Island. They work to protect our precious waterways and provide a vital source of education about the crucial role our watersheds play in the island's delicate and intricate ecological system. And in recognition of this valuable work, last year our government invested $250,000 to fund their activities. This year will provide an additional $250,000 in core funding to these essential organizations, bringing our 2-year commitment to $500,000. Government will also create a $750,000 land protection fund to allow us to partner with organizations to protect environmentally sensitive and significant properties. This investment will not only help meet our protected land targets, it will ensure these lands are preserved in perpetuity for the use of and enjoyment of islanders. We are also undertaking, in partnership with our First Nation partners, the development of sustainable forestry programming to enhance forested land as a habitat for wildlife and provide a sustainable source of revenue for our First Nations communities. Funding for this program in its first stage will be $50,000. Mr. Speaker, earlier I referenced the work of the Premier's Council on Recovery and Growth and the valuable feedback they received from islanders. One initiative that was cited several times to the Council was the need for a comprehensive public transit system in the province. Using the Sustainable Transportation Action Plan released in 2019, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure will engage with experts to publish a plan by summer of 2021 and implement pilot routes starting in September of 2021. A total of $250,000 has been committed to complete the study and launch the pilot. Mr. Speaker, no group has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic more quickly and more willingly than our children. They have done whatever they have been asked to do, wearing their masks, social distancing from besties and buddies, resisting the urge to hug their grandma and grandpa, even adapting to homeschooling and remote learning. But while our youth have been the quickest to adapt, so too are they the ones most likely to suffer the long-term impacts of the greatest social and economic disruption since World War II. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, though not in anticipation of a global health crisis, successive governments in PEI have been making essential and strategic investments in both education and our youth. Mr. Speaker, this administration continues to make important investments in our children, and we will launch our universal pre-K program in September of this year. It will be a community-based, half-day program designed to ensure all children have access to a play-based learning program which will give them a strong introduction to their education journey. This budget commits $2.9 million to introduce and ensure the program is a success. Mr. Speaker, this government has clearly and repeatedly said it's about people. As we anticipate the success of our vaccination program and the return to work by many islanders, particularly women who have been disproportionately displaced by the pandemic, we must focus on families, and we must make every effort to ease and assist parents and caregivers as they return to the workplace. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, we are investing $1.4 million to designate 8 additional early years centers, ensuring the delivery of quality child care services that are accessible and responsive to the needs of island children and families. In addition, we're committing $650,000 to create 300 new child care spaces in our province. These spaces will expand access for young islanders and also assist in the initial launch of the pre-K program. In January of 2022, we will implement one of the final planks in our multi-year commitment to the early years. We will lower child care rates to $25 a day. It is estimated that this initiative will cost $2.5 million annually when it is fully operational, and this budget includes $625,000 for that initiative. These additional centers and spaces will require additional early childhood educators. With this budget, we are investing $1.1 million to increase the salary grid for early years center staff, autism assistants, and special needs assistants to acknowledge the significant role each of these education specialists play in the caring of our children. Our government is also adding an early childhood coach, one additional early years autism specialist, and increasing early years special needs and autism grants to boost caseload capacity. Mr. Speaker, it is vitally important that we set our children off on the right path in their early years. But it's equally vital that we follow up and that we continue to invest in and accommodate all of their educational aspirations. We are also increasing the core budget of the Public Schools Branch and the French Language School Board by $4 million this year. This additional funding will add a total of more than 80 additional frontline positions, including 20 teachers, 34 educational assistants, 12 school counselors, 4 autism consultants, 8 bus drivers, and 6 administrative assistants. Mr. Speaker, our government has continued to recognize the significance of Acadian and Francophone populations in our province, how they enhance our culture and sense of community across PEI. We have particularly indicated the importance of French language education, and with this budget, we are committing to increase staffing supports in our French language schools, including 16 new teachers and 2 educational assistants, 2 additional counseling and autism supports, and 3 additional bus drivers. Our budget also makes provision for 2 new cultural officers who will enhance opportunities for our youth in our French schools. As well, Mr. Speaker, we'll be expanding our school lunch program, which was launched in September of 2020. We know that good nutrition and good learning go hand in hand. Already this year, over 250,000 healthy meals have been served to students. Teachers have observed a marked improvement in both attention span and mental acuity as more students get access to the essential nutrients to support learning. We know that learning and good health are also important during the summer, and this budget includes $600,000 for the delivery of healthy food to children during the summer months. Mr. Speaker, we have not forgot our post-secondary students. In addition to an increase in funding of $1.3 million between Holland College, College de Lille, UPEI, and the AVC, we are investing $500,000 to increase the Island Advantage bursary for Island students. When combined with other forms of support like the George Coles bursary, the cost of higher education is significantly reduced for Island students choosing to stay and study here. In fact, it is estimated that approximately 80% of student aid applicants receive completely free tuition to post-secondary institutions. We will also introduce a $200,000 experiential learning fund to enhance the post-secondary experience of Island students who by directly connecting them to a job and co-op placements within their field of study. At the request of the UPEI Student Union, we will also be extending student debt deferral until September of 2021 so that recent graduates do not have to worry about repaying student loans while entering the workforce. Mr. Speaker, over the last year, I've met with industry groups, chambers of commerce, and business leaders. Many have concerns and have had sleepless nights over the course of this pandemic, but the message from our government has been clear to them. We will do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to get through this pandemic. For those reasons, our government will continue to deliver our promise to keep more money in the pockets of hardworking Islanders. Starting in January of 2022, our government will implement the following tax changes. Basic personal income tax exemption will increase by $750 to a new threshold of $11,250, with the intention of fulfilling the commitment to raising it to $12,000 over the course of our mandate. Low income tax reduction threshold will increase by $1,000 to $20,000, And small business tax rate will be reduced to 1% to fulfill our 2019 election promise to make PEI the lowest rate in the Atlantic provinces and give us a competitive advantage in our region. These initiatives will ensure that over 34,000 low-earning islanders will no longer pay income tax. They also show our business community and hardworking islanders that we recognize the sacrifices that they have made over the last year and will also spur growth in our economy in the future. Our tourism sector has been discussed by all sides of this House in this session. Islanders are known for their warm and welcoming nature, and this time of year would typically be preparing to welcome hundreds of thousands of visitors to our province over the spring, summer, and fall months. We all anxiously await an announcement about the Atlantic bubble this spring and the opening of our borders to the rest of Canada so that we can safely jumpstart our tourism industry. To assist the tourism industry as we move to the recovery, Tourism PEI, along with industry stakeholders, have developed a tourism strategy that will launch next week. Government will provide funding focused on activating critical initiatives to support our operators as we seek to drive demand and make the most of the 2021 season. As tourism operators look to open for the season, government will introduce a $3 million activation fund to provide tourism operators with a non-repayable grant towards eligible expenses to assist with costs associated with opening for the upcoming season. Mr. Speaker, Prince Edward Island was known as a safe tourism destination before the pandemic, and we will continue to build that reputation during and after the pandemic. Alongside our industry stakeholders, our government is working to develop a program, the first of its kind in North America, to show tourists and residents that our tourism operators aren't cutting any corners when it comes to the safety of islanders and visitors. This program will establish standards modeled on the advice of the Chief Public Health Office as we learn to adapt to the new normal. Key to keeping the cogs of our tourism industry and our economy, as well as turning into a robust workforce. For this year, $750,000 has been dedicated to establish the Workforce Development Agency to ensure evidence-based decisions are made. The agency will assist in accurately forecasting our labor needs in our province to allow entities like Skills PEI, Innovation PEI, Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, and our post-secondary institutions to be responsive in building a resilient workforce by reskilling, upskilling, and training. In addition, a new innovation fund will be introduced to assist businesses to refine and commercialize innovative products and services. And a new strategic improvement fund will be established to help businesses access professional expertise that will help them with operational efficiencies, quality assurance, and capacity building. As part of our ongoing efforts to make support programs more relevant and accessible, we also have undertaken a revitalization and modernization of Innovation PEI programs offered to small business. The new Small Business Assistance Grant will help small business owners and entrepreneurs access professional services and advice in areas such as finance, marketing, quality control, and production efficiencies to support their success. Applicants will receive a 50% reimbursement of up to $4,000 to provide such services. The COVID-19 crisis has underlined for many businesses the importance of having an online presence. In recognition of this growing need, government will make our web presence program permanent. This program provides small businesses and not-for-profits as much as $1,000 to develop and launch a traditional website and up to $2,500 to develop and launch an e-commerce site. A $1 million micro-loan program will be established to provide islanders who identify as BIPOC, Indigenous, women, and 2S LGBTQIA+ individuals and youth with financing to start a new business venture or to support an existing one. Based on the advocacy from the member from Charlottetown West Royalty, we will develop startup grants in this area as well. Mr. Speaker, this government will also support our farmers. We will work with them side by side to help their operations become more sustainable. This year, our government will invest $330,000 to assist with erosion control and soil conservation structures in high-risk watersheds. Government will also introduce incentives to farmers who improve soil health increased length of crop rotations, and plant cover crops to assist in keeping soil in place. We will continue to invest in water research, empowering this government and future governments to make evidence-based decisions. Mr. Speaker, our farmers are stewards of our lands and our environment and are looking for a willing partner to assist them in doing their part for our environment. Simple, practical solutions, such as those offered by Atacan, an island-based business located in Ebenezer, PEI, helps farmers do their part in reducing greenhouse gases. And that's why we will explore opportunities for partnership with them for a made-in-PEI solution for reducing greenhouse gases. The Agricultural Climate Solutions Pilot will be introduced this year with both federal and provincial funding in excess of $200,000 to mitigate the production of greenhouse gases from agricultural activities and increase the carbon sequestration capacity of the soil. On the same note, we will also be offering free energy audits for farmers to reduce energy consumption on their operations. Mr. Speaker, our government has worked passionately with members from all sides of this House to establish targets, programs, and initiatives to help create a cleaner environment for generations to come. Wrapped up in the desire for a cleaner environment is economic opportunities, which our government will pursue. Our government will embark on a strategy to build a clean technology sector in our province by supporting PEI-based companies in developing and deploying competitive clean technology solutions. To do this, we will create a $50 million loan portfolio to assist new and existing businesses to adopt and develop clean tech solutions and provide equity investment grants that provide a rebate to anyone investing in an approved clean tech firm based on PEI. A $10 million 5-year fund for research and development in clean technology will also be launched this year. A Clean Tech Challenge Fund will also be created with an initial investment of $250,000 this year. To create the workforce required for the clean tech sector, we will be providing seed funding of $100,000 to establish the PEI Energy Academy. The Academy will work in tandem with Holland College and the UPEI Canadian Centre of Climate Change and Adaptation to identify training needs now and into the future for the sustainability of this new sector. Mr. Speaker, we also know if we want to meet our targets for greenhouse gas emissions in our province, we must focus on getting fossil fuel-related vehicles off the roadways. To do that, our budget includes $1.9 million investment for initiatives for new and used electric vehicles and electric vehicle chargers. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to tackling climate change and to engaging all islanders as we do. We also are committed to doing our part alongside all provinces and territories in Canada. While we have not finalized the full details with our federal partner, our budget projects an increase of $18.8 million in revenues related to a price on carbon. We are committed to returning these revenues back to islanders through rebates and investments in home efficiency, including particular supports for low-income households. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, we have put forward an ambitious spending plan for the coming year. It's a plan designed to guide us down the road to recovery. We are fortunate that the foundation of the island economy remains strong. Thanks to strategic investments on the part of our administration and administrations that came before us, we're in a good position to rebound from this great disruption at a much faster pace than many of our provincial partners. That fact has been confirmed by the chartered banks and the economic think tanks that are projecting growth rates as high as 4.9% for the coming year. As we all know, Mr. Speaker, bankers and economists are not noted for their rosy optimism. Thomas Carlyle referred to economics as the dismal science. Bolstered by our faith in the fundamentals of the PEI economy, the support of our federal government partners, and with confidence in the determination and resilience of islanders, we are casting our eyes ahead to the development of a 3-year plan to get back to a more balanced budget. But for the moment, our focus must be on growing the economy, on building back better, and ensuring, even in these unusual times, that our growth in revenue continues to outstrip our growth in expenditure. As the vaccination rollout accelerates and signs of recovery emerge across our province, we have reason to be optimistic for the coming year ahead. But as we witnessed over the past year, COVID-19 brings with it a unique set of challenges and unknown variables. With that in mind, we are exercising prudence in this fiscal plan with the establishment of a $50 million contingency fund to address such unknowns so that we may remain prepared to support Islanders against any unforeseen situations that may be present. Since being elected in April of 2019, our government has been committed to a collaborative approach of governing. That collaboration requires the input and participation of all members of all parties elected to this legislature. In preparation for this budget, we sought the budgetary priorities of all parties, many of which are reflected within. While we never get everything we ask for, we have worked diligently to ensure the priorities of this legislature, informed by the members elected by Islanders from all walks of life, are included. I'm pleased to say that of the 35 requests presented to us during the budgetary process, 30 are directly or in part included in this document. And to all members of this Assembly, I say thank you for your thoughtful considerations and submissions. I believe all Islanders are better for them. Mr. Speaker, allow me to end my address on a personal note. As I'm sure is true of many of you, the pandemic has given me pause to think about our future and to think about our past. As I noted earlier, we have learned many lessons over the past year. I think one of the most profound things that we have gained from the pandemic is a new understanding of what is valuable and what is essential in our lives. It has nothing to do with status or position or income. We all contribute to the wealth and well-being of the community in our own way, and we are all worthy of dignity and respect and worthy of sharing in the riches and the benefits of the community. Several years ago in this chamber, the Leader of the Opposition brought forward a piece of legislation that proposed a new measure of value, one that is not entirely based on the simple dictates of supply and demand, but one that is based on the worth of things less tangible: safety and security, health, the intimacy of friends, family, and neighbors. The knowledge that if you fall, someone will be there to pick you up. Government has entered into a 3-year agreement with UPEI's Institute of Island Studies to develop precisely such a measuring tool and to use it to get some real sense of the real state of this province. I look forward to their findings. I'm convinced that they will be helpful to all of us in shaping the future of public policy and public spending in this province. Many years ago, when I was in high school, well, not that many years ago.
Last year.
Yeah, last year. I wrote a research paper which required me to interview an elderly neighbor who had served overseas for 5 years, all in heavy combat areas. He told me some interesting stories of the war and his time in battle. But the story that has stayed with me this day wasn't a story about the hardships of battle, but that of his return home after the war. Perhaps because of the disruption of the pandemic, I've been thinking about his story. Thinking about the story and the emotion that came over him as he told me. So much had changed while he was away, and in some ways he felt like he was starting all over. Mr. Speaker, as we emerge from this upheaval, let us in this chamber make a solemn pledge to work together to ensure that no one is left behind. Let us strive to ensure that everyone shares in the blessings that are this life, this country, and in this province. Let us not be satisfied with returning things to normal. Let us aim far beyond that what was previously known as normal. Let's create a new path forward, one that is inclusive and respectful and generous. One with some degree of modesty, I suggest that this budget is the first step of that journey. I look forward to vigorous debate as we explore the details and the intricacies of the budget in the coming days. Mr. Speaker, as always, I thank you for your generous indulgence. Thank you. Merci. Olalia.
Here's the budget. Well done. Get to work. very long to say well done. What?
I wouldn't get a fresh coffee.
Yeah.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford and the opposition House Leader.
Two cups of water.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by thanking the many public servants in the Department of Finance and those across all departments who have worked hard over the last weeks and months to put this budget together, certainly not week. Developing a budget is a very big task at the best of times, but developing a budget over the last year with all the disruptions of COVID has certainly made that work much more difficult. Not only that, but because of the new legislative calendar, this budget is being presented earlier than in the past, and only 3.5 months since last fall's capital budget. Again, to all the staff that have worked on this budget tirelessly, thank you for your hard work and your dedication to public service. I know I speak for all members in this House when I say that we couldn't do the work we do on behalf of Islanders without you. A year ago, our province, like the rest of the world, was struck by the impacts of the COVID pandemic. We recognize that the pandemic has placed extraordinary burdens on Islanders, especially vulnerable Islanders and those in marginalized communities. Islanders needed their government to step up, to support them during these difficult times. That's why we were glad to see over the last year that this government relaxed its fiscal restraint. If ever there was a time to spend, this was it. Many of the programs this government rolled out over the past year were indeed helpful to Islanders, and kudos to the government for doing that. However, as the Premier has acknowledged, the response certainly wasn't always perfect. Our caucus proposed a few ideas to help alleviate some of the blind spots that remain in government's pandemic response. Unfortunately, from this budget, it looks like government is content to stay blind to some of these concerns and the needs of Islanders. We ask this government to put its money where its mouth is, in supporting low-income essential workers and frontline healthcare workers. And I guess since there's no money in this budget, in this regard, we can safely say government is not too concerned about recognizing frontline and essential workers. Just more stories, no money behind the words. Put your money where your mouth is. While it looks like we will have to continue to fight COVID for a while yet, we can now see the light at the end of the tunnel. With the vaccine in sight, our focus is shifting from public health response to the economic recovery. Unfortunately for government, there is no Dr. Morrison to lean on for the economic recovery. It is up to government to step up, provide a clear and compelling vision, and lead this province through these challenging times. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the government has continued to dance around the release of an economic recovery plan. We still don't have the economic strategy the government funded in 2019, before the pandemic. Government is putting this House in a very difficult situation. It presents us with a budget it suggests is necessary for our province's economic recovery, without having provided this House with an actual recovery plan. That does not sound like a government that is prepared to respond to the economic challenges ahead of us, let alone one that is equipped to transform our economy for the betterment of all Islanders. Where is the vision, Mr. Speaker? The opposition has been calling on government to promote a just and fair recovery. We've emphasized the need for improving the wages and working conditions of island workers. We spoke about reducing the debt of our young generations, to empower them to start their lives and support the local economy. We spoke about the need to rethink how we support island businesses, whether the approaches of old were truly the best way to approach them. We spoke about the need for climate mitigation and adaptation. We've emphasized the need to get the housing market under control and make housing affordable and accessible for all islanders. Frankly, government's plan, if you can call it that, is severely lacking. Mr. Speaker, many people have spoken about the great pause. The idea that COVID provided an opportunity for government to reflect on the status quo and whether it has been truly serving everyday islanders. It appears to me, based on the document presented in the House here today, the government has wasted this opportunity for reflection. In its own words, government has no intention of being revolutionary at a time when ambition and imagination are needed most. And Mr. Speaker, evident in this budget, the plan for economic recovery is paper thin. If COVID has been death by 1,000 cuts, this budget is crisis management by 1,000 bandages. Islanders have been delivered a smoke and mirrors budget filled with boutique promises and little more. This government loves talking about collaboration. Unfortunately, that is a lot of talk. Mr. Speaker, the official opposition provided a robust submission of budget asks. In the minister's speech, she claimed that 30 of the 35 requests from this side of the House are at least partially included in the budget. This is a nice story, but the devil's is in the details. And apparently, with the minister's math, of the 20 submissions our caucus proposed, at least 8 were completely ignored, and most of the rest are only partially met. Now, I do recognize that government wasn't going to adopt every single suggestion that we made. They have their own priorities, and they make the decisions, not us. We propose the government give low-income seniors on a fixed income a break in their taxes. Nothing. Last fall, my colleague from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke put forward a motion calling on government to offer the shingles vaccine, and this motion was passed by this House. I'm glad to see this finally in the budget. But I have to note that this government has been promising this for 2 years already and haven't managed to deliver it yet. Hopefully, they manage to get their act together this year. It's pretty clear that this government has a recurring problem with delivering on promises. And I'm not even talking about their platform promises. We've seen over and over this government announce some great new programs, more than once, I'll add, but they fail to actually implement the change. So, Mr. Speaker, I have to ask, which of the promises in this budget does this government intend to ignore? If we look at their record and if we look at which of the opposition proposals they've adopted or not, we can see a pattern. Expanded dental care for low-income islanders? No. A basic income pilot for islanders? No. Meaningful action to address the housing crisis? No. Tax breaks for low-income island seniors? No. Addictions navigator position? No. Mobile mental health teams? That's a mess. So we'll see. This government drops the ball on things that would benefit the most vulnerable islanders. Just this morning, the Premier talked about how his government was moving forward, taking action and implementing initiatives that the previous government could not. Well, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully disagree. Government's #1 priority over the last 2 years has been mental health, in words and stories at least. But what has this government actually done? The mobile mental health units. Just listened to question period this morning. They are a mess. The one service that advocates and staff alike were excited about was the psychiatric urgent care clinics, the PUCs in the Hillsborough Hospital. We were told the patients felt safe and respected at these clinics, and staff were excited and motivated to work in an environment that was actually helping people. Then they were suddenly closed with no promises of reopening, but as usual, no action with a promise of reopening, but no action as of late. The new mental health hospital that this government was elected on seems to be all but forgotten. The third option, an evidence-based, important option for women who have suffered sexual assault, has yet to be implemented. We've been told for almost a year that this option is almost ready to go, but yet again, no implementation. Every time a delay happens, it may not feel big to us here in this house, but let me tell you what happens. Every day that PUC remains closed, Islanders who need mental health or addiction services fall through the cracks. Every day that the mobile mental health units aren't operating, Islanders don't get adequate help they need when they are in crisis. And every day that the third option isn't an option, women are raped and are forced into impossible decisions in the midst of trauma. Delays in promised programs don't just undermine the trust of the public, they affect real people. Real Islanders, and that trauma is something that they never get back. The mobile mental health units mess that has unfolded this week highlights how this government really feels about our frontline healthcare workers. They talk a good talk, but there's not real respect given on the ground. So I shouldn't be surprised that the two requests that the official opposition asked for in the budget to help healthcare workers and show them our true appreciation for what they provide us weren't in this budget. We asked for a frontline healthcare worker bonus, which was not provided. We also asked for dedicated childcare spaces for essential workers, something that unions have been asking for. And they've been asking for it for years. The biggest spending item this government did include in their budget for frontline healthcare workers was recruitment funds. We're going to spend a lot of money on recruitment, new healthcare professionals who will always be treated with a lack of dignity, support, and respect, and they will just end up leaving, thus costing us more in recruitment funds. It's a vicious and never-ending cycle that has to stop. Give our healthcare workers something to stay for. They want to stay here on the island, so give it to them. They want to help. What we hear from healthcare professionals is that there is no plan. From those in the hospitals, long-term care, clinics, West, East, and Central, they all say the same thing. There seems to be no plan for healthcare here on PEI. Lots of great stories and buzzwords, lots of great siloed programs, but no overarching plan. This government clearly has some lofty goals for health, but without a plan, goals are nothing more than a dream. In our responses to the speech from the throne, our caucus encouraged government to be critical of the status quo and thoughtful in its budgeting and expenditure of funds. Over the last 5 years, we've seen revenue growth in personal income tax far exceed growth in corporate income taxes. We have a government that refuses to use its taxation policies to cool speculation in the housing market. We even have a government that wants to make more money through the misery tax of online gambling. Should Islanders be happy about those trends? Mr. Speaker, government must generate revenue ethically and sustainably. Whenever we spend money, we always have to ask ourselves, is this the best use of public funds? Are there better ways to achieve our policy objectives? There are important questions. These are important questions. They can open our eyes to better options, better solutions, better approaches. But I'm not convinced these are the questions the government asks itself. For example, the basic personal amount is often touted as an effective way to deliver relief to low-income islanders. Is it really? 2017 tax data from the CRA shows there were more than 14,000 islanders with income returns below $10,000. Of course, since then, that number has presumably gone up. These islanders don't have enough income to benefit from these tax measures. In fact, a person earning $150,000 would receive more tax relief from these measures than a low-income tax filer. And no person would make more than $74 a year through this tax policy. Mr. Speaker, these increases cost the province millions of dollars in foregone revenue. And sure, it does provide some relief to some islanders, but is it the best way to support islanders? Would money have been better spent on our healthcare system to improve access to primary care and mental health care? Would it have been better spent addressing the housing crisis? Would it have been better spent supporting the struggling tourism sector or our island farmers? Government has the ability to use the tax system to achieve its desired policy ends, but it doesn't want to do that. We've heard the Minister of Environment go on about modeling. Where's the modeling on the government's tax policy? The official opposition asked for a vacancy tax to curb speculation and ensure that residential properties are being used for housing. Again, government has taken no real steps to do this. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Minister of Finance is quite aware someone will have to pay for the recovery. Whether government wants to admit it or not, taxes pay for services. I've seen a government that has favored businesses more than islanders. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives report Picking Up the Tab, which frustrated government very much and whose findings were disputed by government, I understand that. They did have one claim that this government has done little to dispute. Government has spent more to assist businesses than it has to assist individuals. More and more often, we are seeing signs that it's not about the people. It's about profit. Like the throne speech, this is a very underwhelming budget that fails to rise to the occasion. It's clear that this government has no vision for the future of this province. Government has managed through the COVID crisis thanks to the heroic efforts of Dr. Heather Morrison and our healthcare workers, as government has said. But it has so far completely failed to provide any kind of strategy for the post-COVID recovery. This government's disjointed approach, a story of boutique promises, amounts to little more than crisis management by 1,000 bandages. Is this the best budget this government could offer? No. Is this truly the best budget this government could offer? On this side of the House, we expected better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just wait for the podium.
Yep. that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't be as long, Mr. Speaker, but I'll be more direct. Mr. Speaker, we all know that COVID-19 has been the dominating concern facing Islanders, Canadians, and the world from the last year. And I remember the early days of the pandemic. In the midst of public fear and worry, there was also an ember of hope. In short, many thoughtful people, both here and around the world, were hoping for social changes. There was a sincere belief that the gaps exposed by the pandemic would result in long-term improvements to the way we respond to challenges faced by families, individuals, and communities. Mr. Speaker, the members of the Liberal caucus believed in those opportunities. And over the last year, we have vigorously advocated for a reassessment in the way we pay essential workers and the supports we provide to Islanders in long-term care, and our willingness to truly begin the hard work of addressing the growing mental health crisis in this province. As long as the months of the pandemic slowly ticked by, the Liberal caucus began to watch government's response to the challenges exposed with a deepening sense of dismay. Instead of profound and meaningful action, we watched a patchwork of announcements and excuses that merely papered over the issues of the day. Early on, the Premier used the sad old cliche, never waste a good crisis. Well, to my mind, and in the view of the Liberal caucus, the opportunity for governments to truly address some of the obvious economic inequalities and social neglect in our province was abandoned. Let me illustrate my point, Mr. Speaker. For months, we have faced different degrees of lockdowns, and thousands of Islanders were asked to stay home and limit their activities, and they did. During that time, the government could have easily created a kind of distance learning programs that would have accelerated and enhanced the skills of thousands. Or take a look at our hospitality sector. We all know the terrible challenges faced by thousands of entrepreneurs and employees who have built our island into a world-class destination. These gains were hard-won, and it took many years for us to build a great reputation as a family vacation destination and a skillful appeal to a wider range of visitors. But instead of taking the past year to truly refresh and enhance this sector, we have seen mere Band-Aids that did little to stop the bleeding and nothing to prepare us for a true year of recovery in 2022, but more importantly, beyond 2022. From another perspective, the pandemic starkly revealed obvious gaps in long-term care. Mercifully, we were fortunate here, but were the lessons from across Canada even heard? Did government even begin the hard work to address the future needs of a growing community of seniors? Sadly, Mr. Speaker, the answer is no. Mr. Speaker, I was honored at a time to be Minister of Finance during a period of unparalleled economic growth. Our record in job creation, advancement of educational opportunities, and financial management was arguably one of the best in the province's long distinguished history. And Mr. Speaker, just out this morning, year over year in employment, we are clearly lagging behind our Atlantic Canadian peers when it comes to employment recovery. And I worry about that, Mr. Speaker, and the long-term effect this could have on both island families and the prospects of economic recovery. I'm proud to have been part of administration that introduced full-day kindergarten in the George Coles bursary, and I'm certainly glad that's being expanded by this government. We also had a string of balanced budgets that respected public investment in our government, and I think that has to continue to be an important emphasis on this government. But 2 years into this government, we have yet to see a vision, a plan, or an understanding that challenges that we face today will stretch for many years into the future. And for that reason, after a series of disappointments that included the speech from the throne, the issues of yesterday in regards to mental health, I gave up most of my optimism around 2021 operating budget. Perhaps I'm a pessimist, Mr. Speaker. Yes. But I reduced my expectations, knowing that government's track record does not point towards an imaginative, comprehensive, and well-considered response to these dark and difficult times. And it is important we have debate. And in spite of the previous Premier's obvious discomfort with criticisms, an open and mature government welcomes debate. Be reminded, 1, democracy requires debate. 2, debate is often built around the need for legitimate criticism. And 3, legitimate criticism is not partisan activity. In fact, it is the bedrock of government accountability. Having said that, I would like to move towards some specific observations about today's budget. First of all, I would like to offer 2 compliments. The entire Liberal caucus is pleased to see government finally keep its promise to provide free shingles vaccines to all Islanders over 65. As the budget speech acknowledges, this was something that we have been pushing for 2 years as well, and this will be a great relief to many seniors who have often lived on a fixed income. Second, it is good to see some early steps towards safe consumption sites on the island. Although the announcement in the budget appears overly cautious, it is welcome news to see some progress made on an increasingly important file on Prince Edward Island. Having said that, I am perplexed by some spending decisions revealed in this document. The issue of access to mental health care has become a crisis. We all know there are problems, and the gaps revealed by the pandemic are obvious. So I was expecting to see higher expenditures in areas like acute mental health. Last year, this House approved spending in acute mental health of more than $22 million. But Health PEI underspent that budget by nearly 3%. Really? Were the needs in acute mental health less than expected? Did government believe there was room there to pad the budget? Or take a look at addiction services. Recently, the government is expected to spend a little over $14 million on addictions. This coming year, there is a cut. In a year when there is a home gambling scheme being rolled out by this government. So I'm merely left to wonder, why is addiction services not expanding?
Stop scaring people.
On the same matter of unspent dollars, I am surprised by the contingency fund. According to this budget, the House approved more than $108 million in contingency. Well, what was spent? A little over $80 million, which means that government left nearly $28 million on the table. So were all the needs of this province met? Did government truly serve the people of this province with mental health challenges? Did government address the individuals and families that are being destroyed by addictions? Did government prepare a thorough plan to move our hospitality sector through a difficult time? Mr. Speaker, the answer to those 3 questions is no. The money was there, approved by this House, to truly ensure that no Islander was left behind. But government's vision did not include an obvious need to address challenges in the moment, let alone prepare a long-term plan. And then, Mr. Speaker, on the tax side, this year the government is expected to raise an additional $19 million in carbon levies. Take a look at page 16. Revenues from the carbon levy are going from $16.6 million to more than $35 million, Mr. Speaker. And where is the plan? Well, buried at the back of the budget speech, we see a few vague references, rebates to home efficiency. Mr. Speaker, this increase to the carbon levy is one of the largest tax increases in island history. And government's entire explanation is exactly 84 words, Mr. Speaker, 84 words on this. That, Mr. Speaker, works out to about $223,000 per word, which to my mind at least is an inadequate explanation. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you there will be many questions about the carbon levy in the weeks to come. Islanders will want to know where their money is going. With all that said, I do want to acknowledge the central role played by the federal government during the pandemic.
Thank them for their tax.
Without programs like CERB, the Canadian Wage Subsidy, the Canadian Emergency Rent Subsidy,
Carbon tax.
Prince Edward Island would be in a lot of trouble. Over the last year, close to $1 billion was transferred to Islanders, and the provincial government was also a recipient. According to the budget, an additional $80 million was provided by Ottawa to the government, which certainly allowed for needed investments in mental health, addictions, and tourism. It's just too bad this government did not follow through on obvious gaps in our program delivery. And I am doubly disappointed by the apparent lack of vision. As I said earlier, this was an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, Mr. Speaker. We could have done it through education, better supports for vulnerable islanders, and a new economic plan for our hospitality sector. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we are feeling deflated. There is a little vision, and there appears to be no real roadmap forward. As I've outlined over the past several weeks, we believe not enough has been done to offer islanders the clearest possible direction in terms of access to health care, education, the economy, and most especially the opportunity to use this time to our best possible advantage. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize all those who have worked so hard on Prince Edward Island, including the essential workers, the public servants, and many others too numerous to mention, who put in long hours, and every islander who has followed the rules and worked very hard to protect us all. And I'll leave you with this thought, Mr. Speaker. History pundits are going to say down the road, and I hope I'm alive to see this, we will not be remembered on how we dealt with COVID-19 on Prince Edward Island, but the success of how we move forward to create positive change and overcome created consequences due to COVID-19 is how we will be remembered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member? Honourable member, do you want to adjourn debate with a seconder?
Third, where is it? Mr. Speaker, I move seconded by the member O'Leary Verness. That debate on the motion to be now adjourned.
Show and carry. The honourable member from Morel, Dona, and the government house leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Montague-Kilmuir, that this House adjourn until Tuesday, March 23rd at 1 o'clock in the PM.
Show and carry.